What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was trapped in a genjutsu filled with his dream girls? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Hey old man, Sarutobi blanched at the sudden increase in volume. Finishing his analysis of the bill in front of him, he finally signed off on it and set it aside, meshing his fingers together and summoning his patience. Yes, Naruto? What's, ahn Mio Hijutsu? The loud-mouthed 7-year-old asked. Sarutobi opened his mouth to answer, only to recall that Yugo had been reporting in about several questions the child had been asking her lately. This had been one of them, as well as the taijutsu. What do you want to know for? Well, the dreams. I keep seeing the, taijutsu. He forced his mouth around the weird word, one he had only become acquainted with recently, and what Yugo Nichan said was an inverted pentagram. Obviously, that was also a new phrase for him. She said that it's used a lot in Mio Hijutsu. So what is it? Sarutobi sighed. As much as he hated these recurring dreams and what they signified, he had no real reason not to answer the questions being presented to him. It's Onmyojutsu, or on my Udo. He took a moment to write the words down and then showed them to Naruto. It's rooted in the principles of yin and yang, as opposed to our ninjutsu, which is based on the 5 elements. It's associated with astronomy and divination. Some of the more eccentric ninjas tend to use it with genjutsu, but there's been no recorded effect. Naruto stared blankly at him, and the third Hokage resisted the urge to plant his forehead in his palm. It was rare that he got to teach anymore. It tells you about the stars and what's happening in far places. That was about as simple as he could get it. The child nodded. Gotcha. So why am I dreaming about it? Am I supposed to become an, he paused, trying to remember the word, astronomy person? Because I am scheduled to be Hokage. That brought a smile to Sarutobi's face. Naruto was determined, if anything. Well, we'll see. So, old man Hokage, what are my dreams about? Why do I see a bunch of dead people, and then some guy tells me I'm the next, and then he dies too? Lately, I've been getting the feeling that I knew him, and that I killed him. Sarutobi frowned. This was sensitive material, but after several council sessions on the matter, no real consensus had been reached on how to handle it. Many were resolutely opposed to it, in fear of what he might decide to do, but others were drooling at the thought of having such a deadly tool at their disposal. Screw it, he deserves to know. I hate the idea of fate mingling with this kid, but it seems like the world isn't ready to let it go. Naruto, sit down, you're going to discover a few things you may not be ready for. The 7-year-old frowned, but did as ordered, dragging a chair over and sitting across from the Hokage. The old ninja felt drained, but there was no way to avoid this. You have a 5-month gap in your memory. I ordered it to be placed there. Why? Naruto seemed remarkably calm about it. Sarutobi wondered at that, but answered anyways. Because about a year and a half ago, you. Now or never, old man. You killed someone. Naruto blinked. I killed someone. A nod. Really? A nod. Who? We never discovered his name. He was a Kiri nin who was mortally wounded during an assassination attempt against the Inuzuka clan. He crawled into an alley that you were apparently in at the time. When we arrived, he was dead, and you were covered in his blood. There was a long silence. Then, Naruto spoke. This is heavy shit. I'm telling you this because you need to know, especially if these dreams are indicative, what you're supposed to become. For several hundred years, there has been a clan of assassins that served to protect the delicate balance of power by taking out people of key influence at pivotal moments. This clan only ever consists of one person, and the title and clan is passed on when someone kills that assassin. Naruto leaned back in the chair. He was beginning to piece together the puzzle, and his mind was working. He was quickly coming up on where the old man was, and would soon pass him by. This clan is called the Sakurazukamori. They specialize in Onmyojutsu and on my Udo. If you're having these dreams, then… Holy shit. Naruto interrupted, his eyes wide. I'm the next, Sakurazuka whatever. It was 10 o'clock at night, and finally Naruto was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. Fortunately for Sarutobi, it had been a Sunday. When the child finally convinced him that truly serious about this, he had set aside his remaining duties for the day to escort the child to the Konoha library. The material they contained on Onmyojutsu was incredibly brief, but the Hokage had expected that. His focus, however, had been on educating Naruto in exactly what the beliefs behind the practice were. Yin and Yang, he had started, follow 4 laws. The first is that they are opposing. Temperature, for example, a substance is cold or hot, and that cold and hot are yin and yang respectively. However, they are also complementary ideals. You cannot have any phenomenon without both yin and yang. They mutually transform. When summer arrives, you have reached the apex of yang, and now it gradually transforms toward its yin counterpart, winter. Last is that they mutually increase and decrease. As yang increases, yin decreases. As yin increases, yang decreases. Naruto, for once, hadn't looked glazed. He had looked directly at Sarutobi, and the Hokage could almost see his synapses firing, making connections and steadily progressing toward a fuller understanding of what he was being told. Doubtless, the examples helped. The elder man had smiled, relishing the fact that the boy was finally taking the schooling seriously, before allowing the child to ask a question. What does this have to do with astronomy and, the D-word thing? I'll get there in a bit. You need to understand this first. Yin and yang apply to humans as well. We consist of the body, our yang, and the spirit, our yin. With ninja techniques, we often combine both. Chakra is spirit energy that is expelled to produce physical phenomena. Yin and yang. Onmyojutsu, specifically the arts practiced by the Sakurazukamori, if the notes passed down from cage to cage are correct, work in a slightly different manner. Basically, Naruto, as a Sakurazukamori, you can learn how to kill a man by forcing his mind to believe that the body is dead, without needing to touch him at all. The child had scrunched up his face in confusion. But his body isn't dead. So wouldn't his mind realize that and just keep going? You underestimate the power the mind has, Naruto. Convince the mind that the body has shut down and it will lock up the body on its own. Or, kill the mind and the body will decay. The Sakurazukamori is feared for these reasons, Naruto. Onmyojutsu is not Genjutsu. It doesn't use chakra, and therefore it can't be dispelled like an effect that uses chakra. Most of us don't know how to counter it. The only saving grace is that using such techniques incurs backlash. The more powerful an Onmyo technique, the more dangerous it is to use. Wow, really? The child had frowned. But old man, I don't really want to kill. I mean, I could obviously become Hokage with this, but... The third Hokage had to fight the urge to dance. Most of his worry evaporated instantly. He knew for a fact that the Sakurazukamori influence would lead Naruto to eventually take a life, but that was part of the ninja way. His restraint, even at a young age, was remarkable. You won't have to worry about that for a while. Like any school, it will take you a long time to get to the techniques that are decidedly lethal. And like any school, they're only lethal if you make them lethal. The child had frowned pensively and then nodded. I'm going to become the greatest ninja ever, and I'll use this to help. But I won't kill anyone. I swear. Sarutobi had felt his heart fracture. You won't have that choice, Naruto. It's your fate, your duty, until you die. I hope so, Naruto. So keep talking, old man. Very well. That conversation had taken place 7 hours ago. Naruto had taken the books on Onmyo and set them off to the side, declaring that he would read them himself and try and puzzle them out. The rest of the time, aside from a brief break for dinner, had been the two of them poring over historic annals looking for references of the Sakurazukamori's feats and exploits, or Naruto grilling Sarutobi for everything that the elder knew about the nature of illusions and jutsu. The third Hokage was more than happy to answer the questions, since the boy finally seemed to be taking interest in his education. While he doubted that the child would retain most of it, he had no problems answering. Now, Naruto was asking about registry information. It didn't take Sarutobi long to realize why. He was hunting for any mention of families that he could find mention of in the book. He really is serious about this. Well, I can't really blame him. He finally has something he can be excited about. The question is whether or not they will take him in. Considering who he is, unless they thought they could use him, most families would turn him away. Still, halfway between Konoha and the border of the ricefield country, a small enclave gathered. They stood enclosed in a ring, each holding a candle and chanting softly. In the middle of the group stood an elderly woman, staring into a pool of water. Occasionally, her body would tremble, and every time it grew worse, but she maintained a grip on the edge, refused to move. Finally, though, her body broke. The water grew distorted as blood polluted it, and the chanting stopped as various members of the clan rushed forward to assist her. Dragging her to a prepared bed, they forced water down her throat, and at last she spoke. "The boy has awakened." Hushed gasps ripped through the assembly. The large, bald man by the bed raised his hand, and all was quiet. "Is that all, Reverend Mother? He seeks training. It has ever been our mission to oppose the Sakurazukamori. It should be in our best interests to avoid training him." There was nodding throughout the assembly. Yes, if the Sakurazukamori should rear his head again, they would lose even more clansmen. One person, a younger girl, interrupted the consensus. "Reverend Mother, you said, should. Don't you mean, is? Without the Sakurazukamori, our clan would not exist. Without the darkness, there is no light. In order for us to exist, the Sakurazukamori is a necessary evil. He will come here, for I have seen it. We will not turn him away. For better or for worse, this boy will receive the training he requires. We shall see to it. The cycle has already begun again, it is too late to interrupt it now." There was muttering. The girl again spoke. "But surely if we kill him, then you become the Sakurazukamori. Would you force this clan to kill one of its own? Would you truly be that cruel? This child has a path to walk. We will lead him down it. This is the task that is laid before our clan." The Reverend Mother spoke softly, and the clan slowly began to disperse. Some of the older members remained. "Reverend Mother, we cannot teach the Sakurazukamori. Too many of our clansmen died against the last one. More will fall to this one." The old woman could not disagree with the logic. Many of the Sumeragi had fallen at the hands of the Sakurazukamori over the ages, and more would follow if the cycle continued. It would seem a prime time to eliminate the Sakurazukamori, but the Reverend Mother had been young when the last had undergone his coronation, and very few others still living had. These were the same questions she had asked, and living as the Reverend Mother gave her the insight to see why exactly her predecessor had answered so. "Come, and walk with me." Gripping her cane, she lifted herself out of bed and began to hobble in the direction of the forest. The reduced entourage exchanged looks, but followed her. 60 years ago, the previous Sakurazukamori was selected. I asked many of the same questions, and I answered just now how my Reverend Mother answered my questions. Without the Sakurazukamori, the Sumeragi would decay and then disappear. No, we need our foe. Then, the girl frowned. We'll always be fighting? Until neither Sakurazukamori or Sumeragi are needed. When the world obtains unity of opposites. She smiled at the young girl, before looking up at the remaining people. Make the necessary preparations for a visit from an honored guest. The Sakurazukamori will be staying with us for an indeterminate amount of time. They nodded and began to leave. And send someone to guide him here. He'll learn of us by name, but he won't know where to find us. Who should be sent, Reverend Mother? One of her attendants asked. She thought about it for a moment. Send Arisa-chan. She knows the way. With that, she motioned, and all but her favorite attendant departed. You wish to ask something, Mitsu-chan? She croaked out. Mitsu-chan frowned, ran a hand across his shaved head as he contemplated how to phrase his question. He believed in the woman before him fully. She had never led them astray, and he doubted she would now. But the notion of bringing one of the most dangerous killers into their home, well, he was concerned. Are you sure that sending Arisa was the best move to make? If the child is already Sakurazukamori, even without training he's powerful enough to have killed the previous one. If he decides to kill her just because, well, she has no way to defend herself. If the child is strong enough to defeat her, then he has no need of Onmyojutsu anyways. Should that happen, assume him to be a true Sakurazukamori. But he has not shown any hostility yet, so he should be receptive. He is young. Young by whose account? The man asked stonily. By anyone's. The child is 7. A 7-year-old inherited the title of Sakurazukamori? I never saw the specifics of the last one's death. I only felt it. Until today, I didn't have an inkling of who the new assassin was. It was as surprising to me as it is to you, but it is the truth. Now do you see why I chose Arisa? It's still a risk. Everything is in this day and age. Go tell her already. She needs to get moving if she wants to be there when the boy sets out. He'd leave before discovering where our compound is. He's not the brightest child. Naruto was out on the town as soon as stores were opening. He had a journey ahead of him, and he needed supplies. Well, he didn't really think he needed them, but the old man had told him to get supplies and provided him with a shopping list. And, well, Naruto needed to spend some of the excess money that the old man's allowance had given him. His first stop was a clothing store. The owner was relatively ambivalent to Naruto, but Hokage had sent word that he was to have a specific set of clothes prepared for the child when he came by, and Naruto had been told to visit him as early as possible. So when the man presented, with a grudging smile at the boy's sheer exuberance, his new outfit, well, Naruto found it hard to express his thanks, and settled instead for running off to the dressing room to change immediately. The shopkeeper was not a huge fan of orange, especially not after being faced with the painfully loud jumpsuit that the Kyuubi brat wore. However, he had to admit that as the 7-year-old stepped out, when done in moderation it certainly worked. The child now sported a long coat in a matte blue with a spiral insignia in the middle of the back done in orange. Underneath the coat, he wore orange pants, with a white stripe down the outside of each leg. His vest was black, his tools within easy and convenient reach should he need to use them. The man's own personal touch were a set of grips on each hip. 2 scrolls could be placed on each side, giving him immediate access if he so needed it. The sizes were adjustable to accommodate other objects as well. The child's praise and thanks was effusive, and the old man actually found himself quite flustered and embarrassed. "Hey, mister, I dunno how long these will last me, and I don't know how long I'll be away. If I pay you, will you make me a new pair every year? Just deliver them to the old man Hokage and he'll get them to me." The phrase old man Hokage nearly had the shopkeeper crying with laughter. In between gasps, he promised the child he would, and then waited for the boy to depart before again laughing at the overly friendly term. Over the course of the morning, Naruto made several other visits, securing supply enough to last him a week. More than enough for him to make rounds and get to a town if he didn't have any luck. When he loaded his pack, it was a little heavy, but he endured. For the first 3 steps. At that point, an Anbu agent arrived. Naruto had always been a little bit unsettled by most Anbu. Not because they were so deadly and he was afraid that their bias would carry into their work, but because they were so quiet. Silence unnerved him. "Hokage-sama has requested your presence. If you will hand me your pack, we'll be on our way." The voice was calm and even, and Naruto had no idea who it was. A new member perhaps? He was familiar with most of Anbu, and not being able to identify this one was throwing him off even more. Managing to shrug off his pack, he handed it to the Anbu agent who hefted it, and then took hold of Naruto's hand. Forming the seal for Shunshin with a single hand, he, the pack, and the child disappeared. Only to reappear outside of the building where Sarutobi's office lay. Handing the child his pack, the Anbu agent opened the door, and motioned for Naruto to enter. Which the short figure did, giving the Anbu figure an odd look. Presently, the agent himself entered and shut the door, finally doffing his mask. "Ah, Itachi. Thank you for bringing Naruto here to see me." The third Hokage smiled warmly, and Itachi bowed. The girl, no, woman, seated to the side of the desk did not escape his notice, and though he gave no indication of it, he was curious. More so when she rose, crossed the room to him, and then adopted a seiza sitting position before pressing her forehead to the floor. "Sakurazukamori-sama, the Sumeragi clan greets you." There was a long moment of silence in the room. Itachi stared at the figure bowing before him, then at the third Hokage, and then at Naruto. The genius had heard of the term she addressed him by before in passing, but never in relation to him. Judging by the way that the third Hokage was now proving unable to restrain some measure of mirth, the girl was mistaken. "Oi, Ni-chan, I'm the Sakurazukamori." The youth seemed half irritated, half amused at the situation, judging by his look. She glanced around the room, noted no indication that the boy was lying. Mortification pressed in on her, and she flushed hotly, immediately scooting over and repeating her introduction. When she felt a hand on her shoulder she tensed, terrified that she had invoked his wrath and her death was imminent. "Hey, get up, I don't like the bowing thing. Save it for when I do something." Almost instantly she was on her feet, apologizing profusely. It took Naruto a full minute to get her to quiet down and stop acting like inconveniencing him was the end of the world. Turning to the Hokage, the blonde frowned thoughtfully. "I thought that we had no idea where the Sumeragi clan was. Did you find something out or remember something or? The Reverend Mother sent me. She said that it was better that you come with guidance, to prepare you for the trials ahead. Something about the proper mindset." She started rambling, and when Naruto gave her an odd look she blushed again, and fell silent, fidgeting. He turned his attention back to the Hokage who was by now grinning broadly. "So I suppose I won't be needing the supplies. Do you have what I asked you for?" "Indeed." The third Hokage reached down and hefted a bag. Naruto took it, reached inside, and pulled out a carton. The woman frowned. "You're giving a child cigarettes? He's the Sakurazukamori, but he's just a kid. Relax, Nichan." He flashed the carton at her. Underneath the rather convincing-looking brand, they were clearly labeled, "Candy cigarettes." "The guy in my dream looked really cool with all of this stuff, and I'm already cool and now I have a similar outfit, so I must be twice as cool by now." He grinned, and she couldn't help but return the smile in part. He popped open the carton, took out one of the very convincing candy cigarettes, and stuck it in his mouth before pocketing the pack and placing the rest in the bag. Lifting it, he grabbed the bag that carried his books and scrolls, and then smiled at Sarutobi. "I'll be back with some new pranking material, old man. Be ready for it." The third Hokage smiled warmly. "Do your best, Naruto. This isn't something you can breeze through. It'll take all of the focus and talent you have to succeed. When you return, I expect you to be able to show me a few tricks." "Of course." The child grinned. "After all, I'm going to be Hokage. I'll master this stuff and nobody will be able to beat me." The two turned to leave, and then Sarutobi called out, "Naruto, could you come here a moment? I have something to give you." The boy turned around, confused, but walked over. Placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice dropped to a whisper. "I wish you only the best of luck. I know that you're going to work your hardest. You'll become strong. So to help you with that, here." He took a scroll that was sitting on his desk and pressed it into the boy's hand. The child looked down at it, and when he looked back up, his eyes were misty. He dove forward, hugged Sarutobi, who was content to chuckle and pat his back. Sometimes, he could shove aside the regret of that day. This was definitely one of those times. It took all of 5 minutes outside the village in silence for Naruto to crack. The woman was acting antsy, and Naruto had never been patient even for a 7-year-old. "Nichan, you never did tell me your name." She half jumped in shock, and Naruto shook his head in exasperation. I'm Sumeragi Arisa. Heiress to the 5th branch of the Sumeragi family." Unsteadily, she turned to look at him, and then looked away when she saw him looking at her. "And, you are Sakurazukamori-sama. I have a real name. It's Uzu. To me, you are Sakurazukamori-sama." She interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. The child paused in his step, turning his head to look at Arisa again. She walked stiffly, but it was not the same stride. Not a nervous gait, then, but one of barely concealed hostility. Naruto's hair rose slightly, and 2 presences inside him boiled. Pressing down the sensations, he responded by placing his arms behind his head. "No, to you, I'm Naruto. Call me Sakurazukamori before I've done anything worth the title and I'll beat you up and force you to call me Naruto." She stopped dead in the road and turned to face him. It was the first time the child had really taken an opportunity to look at her. Tall, even for a girl, her initial impression was motherly. Bangs of black hair framed her face, while 2 brown eyes spitted him. He couldn't identify the look on her face. He had seen it in Old Man Hokage a few times, but he did know that the look almost always preceded bad things. However, she had been rather awkward the entire trip, and it really did irritate him that she never called him anything but his title, especially one that he still knew next to nothing about. So he refused to back down, and instead returned her look with one of his own. A minute passed in stone-cold silence, neither side willing to back down. In retrospect, Naruto would never be able to determine if he had noticed something or one of his 2 mental occupants had. All he could figure out was that his right hand had acted on its own, lashing out in 5 quick, linked movements to trace a pentagram in the air. Arisa, mistaking his actions for an offensive move, was already fishing for Ofuda when she felt the spell complete itself. A barrier? Indeed, not half a second later, 2 kunai struck harmlessly against the symbol. Pivoting, she hurled 5 Ofuda tags with her right hand, her left poised in front of her chest as she chanted. The tags shimmered and then began to glow. With each impact, a decent-sized explosion erupted, and Naruto turned to her with some awe. "You know this Genjutsu stuff?" She had pride enough to sniff imperiously at his suggestion. "Of course. I'm an heiress. But our friend isn't quite gone. Follow me." Sakurazukamori-sama. Even as Naruto protested the name, she grabbed his hand and pulled him along. It didn't escape the boy's eyes that a tag fell from her sleeve before adhering itself to the ground. As they ran sideways, Naruto saw the ninja dart from the foliage he'd been using as cover. More kunai sailed over, but Arisa displayed a surprising level of agility in her movements, exhibiting a dancer's grace in the way she moved herself and Naruto through the attacks without so much as a scratch. Again, as they moved in their elegant circle, Naruto never failed to notice the ofuda that she left. Completing the circle, she turned her back, presenting a most delicious target. Naruto had a vague idea of what she was up to, and elected to say nothing lest her trap fail. Instead, a voice inside Naruto's head pestered him to pay close attention, and he did. The ninja, who was now closing in rapidly while forming seals, was maybe halfway inside the circle when she finished the spell's recitation. Lightning crackled from the tags, and suddenly arced upward, joining together in the circle. The child stumbled backward, shocked by the suddenness of the spell, and heard her voice even through the crackling electricity. She continued to intone the words of the spell, the constant flow of energy strengthening the barrier formed, and then all hell broke loose inside. The conjoined orb of energy began to lash out randomly. Entire chunks of earth were torn up as the arcs of lightning weaved to and fro. The ninja was more than a little terrified, and immediately attempted to run back out. He made it 3 steps before the lightning consumed him. Morbid fascination forced Naruto to watch as the man's body twitched and danced, wreathed in a solid beam of electricity. Arisa's voice stopped, and the spell flickered, and the energy dissipated. Only a charred corpse remained. Naruto felt sick. He could compartmentalize the fact that he had killed someone. After all, while he had no reason to believe that the old man had lied to him, it was not an experience that he himself could recall. In that sense, he was desensitized to it, as though it had happened to someone else and he had been nowhere nearby. But here, he had just seen someone bathed in lightning, cooking to death while his nerves went insane. Too much could not adequately describe what he had just seen. And he decided to make that known by emptying the contents of his breakfast on the ground. Arisa stared at him. This was worrisome. She had been raised on stories of terror. To her, the Sakurazukamori was a being of nightmares, a veritable boogeyman. To see such a person, she had no doubt, not after that barrier, submitting to illness after seeing someone die, well, she was confused. Everything that her upbringing had told her to believe about the Sakurazukamori was being challenged. The boy had probably never been in a serious fight before now. How he had claimed the title then, she couldn't understand. Hesitantly, she closed the distance between them, knelt, and put her hand on his shoulder. He continued to retch, but the sniffling in between died down. After a few minutes, he shakily rose to his feet, turned to look at her. Nothing was said between them, but she could see it, the gratitude in his eyes. An astonishing amount, really. It took every impulse she had to resist the urge to hug him, and then she just broke and pulled him to her. It was too cruel, she decided. That this child, who could not stand to see a man die, would one day become the world's most feared assassin. No, she wouldn't allow it. She didn't know how she would fight against such an inevitability, but she would. Arisa Nichan, I'm fine now. He mumbled softly against her shoulder. She took a moment to wipe at her eyes, which had misted up, and then she released him and Rosé. Offering him a smile, she received one in return. Naruto-sama, I hope your stay with us is long and enjoyable. I do too. Interesting little boy. One of the 3 remaining nen commented, watching the 2 departing figures lazily from the cover of a thick tree. Normally Ryuse's kunai skills are top-notch. Hard to imagine a brat could have noticed them early enough to dodge, let alone make any kind of defense. But he did, and I don't even know what he used. Forget the brat. The girl, man, she manipulated Ryuse. Completely. The second one spoke up. What do you mean? Why do you think he left cover? No ninja is so stupid that they would willingly leave cover unless there was a reason to. She wasn't moving directly at him, so he could have used the cover a lot longer, but he made himself an obvious target. Her initial guess wasn't too far off, but not close enough for him to be spooked. The ninja bit his lip. Let's go see. The 3 set off toward the area where Ryuse had initiated his assault. When they arrived, they split up, and started searching. Less than a minute later, the female of the surviving trio called out, and they hustled over. She gestured to a tree, and it took them a moment to see what she was indicating. A number of kunai, easily identified as belonging to Ryusei from his unique tags, were embedded in the trunk at erratic intervals. And amongst all of the dotted kunai, a single slip of paper with a pentagram inscribed. What is this? What the hell is that girl slinging around? I mean, I thought those were exploding tags she threw. But what if she's storing actual ninjutsu and genjutsu in these things? I mean, we saw her leaving the tags, and then she did whatever the hell that was to Ryusei. That isn't normal ninjutsu. The first one shuddered to think of that being directed at him. They aren't normal, and I don't like that. We should kill them. The third, the girl, stared at him. We have a mission to accomplish. We're here for one reason. Ryusei's death is unfortunate, but it doesn't cripple us. Let's get moving. Yeah, he mumbled. He took one last look at the tag on the tree, and started when it was suddenly consumed in fire. This is too freaky. Leave it to the bigger guns. The remaining 3 AIM nin began to make their way toward Konoha once again. Are you sure that sending the vessel away was a good idea, Hokage-sama? Yugo asked. It irked her to call the child, the vessel, since he had grown on her in the last 2 months, but appearances needed to be kept. While I do not doubt that the Sumeragi would hesitate before violating your request, he is more exposed to enemies, is he not? The third Hokage looked at her and smirked. Does everyone just assume that in my old age I'm forgetting how vital the child's safety is? Yes, I believe that Naruto is quite safe with the Sumeragi. They make a habit of not being found unless they want to be found. I explained to their messenger everything that they needed to know, including his condition. Yugo's left eyebrow rose. You told them about the Kyuubi? Was that necessary? The smile on Sarutobi's face made her feel as though she had made an obvious mistake in logic, and she blushed slightly, her mind forging ahead and trying to figure out what connections she hadn't made. If Naruto was going to be training in Onmyojutsu, he'd learn the various attacks and defenses involved. But there was more to Onmyojutsu than that. She knew that practitioners had powers of divination, and they could also tamper with spirits and… Oh, I see you're starting to get it. The man behind the desk said with a smile. Yes, I have every intent of allowing them to train him as best as they can. It wasn't an option we considered. The Sumeragi stayed out of that conflict as a whole. If the techniques he learns there could help him pacify the Kyuubi and get it to work with his system, there's no telling what kind of heights the boy's potential could reach. He could do great things. Amazing things. He wasn't salivating at the prospect, but the look he had on his face, one of almost certain and savage glee, was one Yugo knew well. It was the look he constantly wore when he was younger. The guise that had charmed so many soldiers, that had led him to the title of Sandaime Hokage. He was definitely plotting something. And as she saluted and left to go on patrol, she could swear that she heard him begin to cackle. Naruto finally tore his attention away from the scroll the old man had given him before he left. Absorbed in the contents of one of the few real gifts he'd ever been given, he had passed the multiple-hour trek quietly. Well, quietly for Naruto. He looked up, and saw the first signs of a settlement beyond the trees in front of them, standing out against the backdrop of the setting sun. Is that it, Arisa Nichan? Yes, it is, Naruto-sama. The enclave of the Sumeragi. Our refuge against all that occurs in this world. People never find us unless we want them to. Had you left without one of us guiding you, you may never have found us, Naruto-sama. So you were sent to guide me here. At least they're being receptive. He grumbled, and began to start forward. Arisa reached out, grabbed his shoulder, stopping him for a moment, and turning him to face her. Prepare yourself, Naruto-sama. Your time here will not be easy at all. Though the Reverend Mother and I will do our best, people will not be receptive to you. Your line has caused us much trouble over the ages. And on top of that, the training that you undergo will be intense. My understanding is that along with the development of your Onmyojutsu techniques, you will be learning Hakkyokuken, and judging by the scroll you have in the pack, you will be studying other subjects on your own time. I am worried that you may be overreaching. If they hate me, then it's no different than home. Naruto stated simply, blankly. I don't know why, but they do. If they treat me any better here, it won't be a problem. However, his face brightened immediately afterward. As for everything else, I'll be fine. For once, I'm actually looking forward to lessons. I'll do my best and make everyone proud. Arisa smiled down at him, reached down and ruffled his hair. Then welcome to the next stage of your life, Naruto-sama. Sakurazukamori-sama, the Reverend Mother intoned. The clan heads and heirs were assembled at the entrance of the enclave, at least 3 members from each of the 20 families of the Sumeragi clan. And another 40 or so bodyguards, hidden in key locations in case he tried anything funny. However, Arisa noted with more than a little amusement, they were very surprised by the fact that the new Sakurazukamori was a child. Hardly worth the protection, was it? You'll learn quickly that your fear has no basis. The Sumeragi clan welcomes you to our enclave. Naruto glanced sidelong at Arisa, who did not look back at him but nodded, and he stepped forward. Clearing his throat, he said the first thing that he could think of. Don't call me Sakurazukamori until I know what that means. I am Sakurazuka Naruto from this moment on. Call me anything but Naruto and I'll beat you up. There were more than a few outraged noises, and at least 2 clan heads stepped forward in protest before laughter cut them off. The Reverend Mother laughed in earnest, and the large man just behind her met Naruto's eyes and smirked, nodding. Good, good. This place needs a little less reverence. Naruto-sama, is it, then? Come, come, I must introduce you to the people of this village. You will learn very quickly who your teachers are, and why they are your teachers. Your lessons will begin tomorrow. She tilted her head and nodded back toward the village. Naruto started forward, and Arisa matched his stride. The 60-some people parted, allowing the group of 4 to pass through. The young blonde looked around, confused. The gazes of these people, they were not the cold, critical, hateful stares that he was used to. They were more like a Yame Nichan's. He could feel a lot of curiosity in the looks, and hints of fear. That latter part dismayed him so much that he immediately resolved to change it. He stepped to the side and marched up to a relatively young man. Almost reflexively, he stepped in front of the 2 girls near him. But Naruto made no threatening gesture, simply extended his hand. Give me your hand. When the man again hesitated, Naruto rolled his eyes. Just give me your hand, mister. I'm not going to tear it off or anything. Scowling slightly, the man stuck his hand into Naruto's. Though his hand dwarfed the blonde's, Naruto smirked and gripped it, and then shook it, much to the man's surprise. Grinning up at him, Naruto spoke the one thing nobody in the assembly but Arisa was prepared to hear. There, now we're friends. No more of this crap, all right? You know my name, so what's yours? The man stared down at him for a long moment, before the hint of a smile played across his lips. I'm Sumeragi-en, head of the 9th branch of the Sumeragi family. My wife, Nanase, and my daughter, Rin. He stepped aside, and they stepped forward. Nanase smiled and knelt. It's a pleasure to meet you, my apologies. Naruto-sama. Naruto beamed at her. The girl, Rin, gave him an appraising look. You're short. Naruto's eye twitched. I'm only 7, and you're not so big yourself. Bigger than you. Such sound logic, Naruto could not defeat. Soft laughter rippled through the assembly, and Naruto, despite his chagrin, managed a smile. He was glad. The reaction was better than anything he'd ever gotten in Konoha. He was, despite his initial worries, very quickly becoming comfortable. The Reverend Mother, smiling widely at this point, gestured, and he bowed to the members of the 9th family in gratitude before departing. Even though the assembly was no longer required, Naruto couldn't help glancing back and noticing that several of them were chatting quite animatedly at the entrance. They're good people. They were, however, a little worried about your arrival. That you know so little about your heritage is not surprising, but you have to understand that we are a little confused at how a child managed to kill the last Sakurazukamori and take the title. The large man grinned. I assume you know that is how the title is passed from person to person. Yeah, the old man Hokage told me about that. I don't remember it at all. At their blank stare, he waved his hand. Listen, I'm just as confused on the whole matter as you are. My understanding is that he was hurt on a mission and was dying near me. I sped up the process, and the old man segmented off that part of my memory. So like I said, I don't remember it. Naruto-sama, you truly are a weird person. Arisa mumbled softly. Though nobody said anything, the sentiment was universally understood and agreed upon. This kid was just weird. Still, he had some element to him that made them like him, regardless. The Reverend Mother cleared her throat. Now that we have a moment alone, I would like to introduce you to your combat instructor. Sumeragi Mitsuomi. He has passed over the responsibilities as the head of the first branch in order to attend to me and other official matters, including your instruction. The large, shaved man nodded. He will be instructing you in the 8 Infinities Palm, Hakyokuken. He knows several others, but we've agreed that it's the best style suited to your path. Your training with him starts at 5:30 every day. I look forward to seeing you progress. Allow me to make one thing clear, however, Naruto-sama. I do not pull punches, I am not forgiving. If you can walk away from my training every day, I have done something wrong. The large man smirked. If, on the off chance that you make it through to some level of mastery of Hakyokuken, we can talk about adding more styles to your regimen. Until then, I will hear no mention of anything else. Understood? The boy nodded emphatically, and Mitsuomi couldn't help but chuckle. Then let us continue moving. The tour progressed, and over the next hour Naruto learned the layout of the enclave, and met several more of the Sumeragi, often leading to the child demanding the handshake and declaring them to be friends. His attitude was endearing, and very quickly those who talked to him were casting off their worries about the newest Sakurazukamori. By the time the tour was almost over, he was struggling to remember some 50-odd new names. When he asked the Reverend Mother how many there were, she replied, offhandedly, that there were around 1,000. And now, you will meet your Onmyojutsu teachers. The old crone smiled. Teachers? I'll have more than one? The boy frowned thoughtfully. Yes. For Onmyo theory and principles, you will be meeting with me every morning. Be early, Naruto-sama, because I am an early riser and you may find you want more time. Regardless of how much time we have, at 11 o'clock, you will meet with, here she is. The group turned, and Naruto heard the rather audible reactions from Arisa and Mitsuomi. The woman that approached them could best be described as stunning. Her hair was pulled back into a long ponytail that hung nearly to the small of her back. Though Naruto would not notice, or have any reason to notice, until years later, her figure was amazing, and the almost exotic appeal was only emphasized by unusual green eyes. Her gait seemed arrogant, withdrawn, although she seemed to drop it as she approached the group. Sumeragi Yuhei. She will be working with you on practical Onmyojutsu application until 5 o'clock, allowing a half-hour for lunch. Yuhei smiled down at him, and even the child had the grace to blush slightly. She was pretty, even he had to admit. Naruto-sama, I am Sumeragi Yuhei, head of the second branch. I hope your talent allows you to live up to your predecessors in ability, and that your gentle heart prevents you from committing the atrocities they have. The boy could do little but nod, and she knelt down and put a hand on his head. I don't teach very often, Naruto-sama, but I will not allow your potential to go to waste. Understood? Yeah, I got it. He finally broke through the mental block. I'll be the best Onmyoji the world has ever seen. And then I'll be Hokage for sure. Yuhei blinked, then looked up at the Reverend Mother. Hokage? She mouthed. Naruto is from Konohagakure no Sato. A ninja in training, it would seem, and they've given him to us for safekeeping while he learns how to succeed the previous Sakurazukamori. The elderly woman clarified. It seems that he's not just content to succeed the Sakurazukamori line and change the meaning, he also wishes to become the Hokage. Yuhei looked at the boy thoughtfully, and then smiled, although it was brittle. I see. Then sleep well, Naruto-sama, we will begin tomorrow. Naruto-sama, Arisa spoke up, you'll be housed by the… Actually, Yuhei interrupted, if it's not a huge issue, the second branch would be honored to have Naruto-sama stay with us for his time here. She smiled coolly at Arisa, who frowned. She felt an urge to keep him away from her, though she couldn't define a reason as to why, and she really had no standing to do so. Even with her status as an heiress, she could not go against the head of a family. But every part of her maternal instinct was suggesting that letting him go was wrong. Well, I appreciate the offer, Yuhei-sensei. The boy smiled apologetically, but at least for right now, I'd kind of like to stay with Arisa Nichan. Arisa stopped, and looked down. That was unexpected. The first branch had originally offered to take him in, if only because aside from Yuhei they were the most potent of the Sumeragi family, and she was going to agree. But he had just explicitly asked permission, if Naruto-sama desires it. The fifth branch would be more than happy to house you. She could still feel Yuhei's calculating gaze, but smiled anyways. Come, Naruto-sama, we'll help you get set up. With your permission, Yuhei-sama, Mitsuomi-sama, Reverend Mother. With no objections, she turned and practically hauled Naruto away, toward the building that contained the 5th and 14th branches of the Sumeragi. So that's the Sakurazukamori, huh? If he's from the ninja village, then that means that the energy I was feeling, that was. Yuhei watched as Naruto said something that made Arisa laugh, and then turned to look at the Reverend Mother for confirmation. Kyuubi no Yuko. Yes, he is the vessel. He, if the current Hokage is to be believed, has no idea about his heritage. I have no intention of revealing it. It is a job for him to uncover, or for those he is truly close to reveal it for him. His request, though, is an interesting one. Certainly, if he is anything like his predecessors, he would have seen the possibilities of our techniques interacting with a spirit like the Kyuubi. I believe that is, in part, what convinced him to let the child go. You must notice that much of the child's energy is devoted simply to containing it. It is devouring its host. The Reverend Mother sighed and shook her head. Even if we fix the problem of the beast devouring the child, there remains the sizable chance that he will not survive to more than 16 years of age before the consciousness of the person we know as Naruto is overwhelmed by the Kyuubi and Sakurazukamori. I imagine that before he inherited the Sakurazukamori, he was able to manage the Kyuubi, but with two separate consciousnesses alongside his own. We may never see Naruto use his full potential. Only one of the two monsters that inhabit his mind. The crone exhaled, and a tear escaped her. It would be such a waste of life. Is there nothing we can do? Mitsuomi asked softly. Surely, in Onmyo or medicine there has to be something that we can do for Naruto-sama. I was never good at my Udo, so I can't tell what potential he has in that regard, but I imagine that it is incredible. And I'm certain that under training he will grow to be incredibly powerful. I am terrified to shape that potential knowing that his mind could collapse, that he could be twisted against us so simply. There are no readily available techniques for healing such a fractured mind. Yuhei answered, looking up at him. There may be something that we overlooked, and I will investigate as I can. I'm certain that in his time here we can come up with something to help him. I hope so. For his sake. The Reverend Mother shook her head. One way or the other, that child is going to have a hell of a time of it. Naruto-sama? Arisa asked, garnering the attention of most of the people sitting at the table. The two families that inhabited the building generally did not eat at the same time, but the new arrival had shifted schedules around enough that most of each family could be treated to the sight of the young Onmyoji in training devouring food like a vacuum. May I ask you a question? She felt the frowns of a few of her relatives, ignored it. The question had been irking her since they had departed from the tour to get him settled in. Was it, Arisa Nichan? Nom nom nom. Why did you decline Yuhei-sama's invitation to stay with the second branch? Conversation stopped. She had crossed no line. This was news. Delicious, very gossipy news. Was there something about the infamous head of the second branch that the new Sakurazukamori didn't like? Was there scandal between their new visitor and Arisa already? They needed to know. Oh, he stopped eating for a second and looked directly at Arisa. Well, I'm new here. And while Yuhei-sensei, several Sumeragi clansmen literally spat out their food at the term, was nice enough to offer her family's place, I know that you are willing to protect me. He smiled awkwardly. You already have. Right now, I feel safer here than anywhere in this village. Arisa flushed slightly, but smiled. I see. You have nothing to worry about here, Naruto-sama. Dinner resumed, but the thinking continued. Though they restrained themselves, Arisa's parents, the heads of the fifth branch, were dancing. Screw the supposed superiority of the second branch. The Sakurazukamori felt safe with the fifth. Oh, they would be taking advantage of this leverage long after Naruto had returned to Konoha. Dinner ended shortly after, and most of the people retired to their rooms. Naruto followed this trend, but Arisa followed him. Closing the door after herself, she sat and watched with an amused smile as the boy immediately opened one of the scrolls he had brought with him and started to read. Slowly, she began to nod off. She had been woken up in the middle of the night to get ready to go to Konoha and return with the Sakurazukamori. She was low on energy after the lengthy trek and their little confrontation with whoever had attacked them. The last conscious memory of that night was watching Naruto try the seals, a poof of smoke, and then a grunt of irritation. Silly boy, you need to sleep or you'll be too tired to do anything tomorrow. Naruto finally tore his head out of the scroll that contained the information on the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. After some 10 attempts of varying degrees of failure, he had finally decided that reading the rest of the scroll might just help. However, the more he read, the more the words turned into funny scribbles. At long last, he finally gave up. Setting it down, he blinked a few times, trying to readjust his eyes before yawning. How late is it, anyways? That was when he noticed the sleeping form of Arisa. He couldn't help but smile. For some reason, his brain told him to do something, and he couldn't think of a reason why not. Dragging the blanket that had been given to him off the futon, he walked over and laid it across her. Stepping back, he nodded at his handiwork, pleased with himself. Stifling another yawn, he walked back to the futon. His eyes closed, and he was asleep before he had finished falling on top of it. In the 2 years that Naruto had stayed at the Sumeragi enclave, many things had changed. The obvious concerns of a young child growing up aside, the inhabitants had finally gotten used to the high-energy atmosphere. Even Sumeragi children paled in comparison to the force of nature that was Sakurazuka Naruto. They could never understand how, with all of his classes, he maintained friendly or, at least, non-hostile relationships with almost every member of the enclave, played with their kids, and learned subjects not already on his list from other clansmen. There was simply not enough time in the day for the child, whose schedule kept him moving from whenever he woke up till 9 in the night when his Hakyokuken lessons ended, to do all of it. They never deduced that it might be ninjutsu. For indeed, after some 7 months of struggling with that damnable scroll, taking notes on what worked and what didn't, Naruto finally got it to work. And immediately, he started to use it to do things that he couldn't do while he was in school. The notes had mentioned that the Kage Bunshin divided his chakra into even segments when he split, distributed amongst each clone. He had noted, however, that the well of magical energy that fueled his Onmyojutsu was not split. In short, Naruto couldn't really afford to miss any class taught by his 3 teachers. That was what the Kage Bunshin was for, taking care of everything else he wanted to do while he learned. Of course, in 2 years, many things still had not changed. Damn, Naruto yelled. He still had trouble waking up before 9 o'clock without assistance, for example. Sakurazuka Naruto was currently attempting to eat breakfast, dress himself, and brush his teeth all at once. A pair of raven shikigami, apparently a trait passed down through the Sakurazukamori line, currently beat their wings desperately, trying to hold a bowl of ramen aloft, occasionally tipping it to allow Naruto to work through his meal. He scowled, having missed with his sandal 4 times, before finally snagging his foot inside of it. Snapping it in, he stood upright and grabbed the bowl, dismissing the 2 shikigami. Tossing it back, he belched, excused himself. Arisa Nichan had stressed that manners were very important, and then began to furiously brush. A minute later, he was out of his room, down the hall, out of the house and running across the grounds. The Sumeragi were, by this point, used to it. Several smiled, the rest simply ignored it, but everyone moved with more gusto. After all, it was hard to see such enthusiasm and not feel affected. Stopping outside of his classroom, where the Reverend Mother awaited, Naruto paused to catch his breath. Forming the now familiar seal, he whispered, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." Poof! 4 copies of himself appeared. All right, the usual drill. Some studying on those other scrolls, help Arisa Nichan with her duties, get the day's shopping list from Aiko-san and take care of it, and go help En-san with his project. After that, free roaming time. Got it? They saluted and then departed. Turning, he paused, then opened the door and stepped into the classroom. The Reverend Mother did not look up from her book, but Naruto knew she was aware of him. He never knew how, but she had instincts that defied her age. So he took up his position in front of her, and pressed his forehead to the ground. It was not out of duty, but genuine respect for this woman, who had given him such a gift in his time here. All prepared to terrorize the village again, Naruto-sama? She chuckled. She had been the first to discover how Naruto managed to do so much during the day, but kept it to herself. After all, the various reactions that the clansmen had to it were beyond funny. Then let's get down to business. Business equaled lessons in the theory and principles of Onmyojutsu, with a few demonstrations here and there. Which equaled absolute bliss for Naruto. Of all of his classes, he enjoyed this the most. Here, he could grapple with problems on a theoretical level, where no time concerns were pressing on him. He could analyze and decide the best course of action to any problem given him if he had the time. Time was not always something he would have, though, and the Reverend Mother and Yuhei both impressed this on him. In the area of split-second decision-making, Naruto generally straddled the 50% marker for correct choices. In the Reverend Mother's lessons, this merely meant that he moved on to the next question with a slightly shaken confidence. In his practical lessons with Yuhei, well, there was a row of felled trees that had been nicknamed the Naruto row, because he had taken hits he shouldn't have. Not to say that he disliked Yuhei's lessons. Even as he left the Reverend Mother's classroom and spotted En and one of his clones hauling lumber through the center square, he smiled at the thought of his next lesson. He liked Yuhei, though at times she could be a bit smothering, physically speaking. Her classes were never boring, and it was thanks to her that he had seen as much growth in his Onmyo abilities as he had. He was still nowhere near her, but even she had expressed some surprise in how quickly he grew. When he arrived at the clearing where Yuhei taught, he sighed. She was nowhere to be seen, which meant it was a game of cat and mouse to start. He liked these, but they tended to drain him physically, and he always suffered for it later with Mitsuomi. Still, it certainly gave him a lot of practice with a variety of techniques. Walking over to the sculpted pond that stood testament to the deliberate clearing, he entwined his fingers, leaving only his two middle fingers extended, and began to chant. The water stilled itself, and then Naruto saw. Onmyo divination was, compared to the kinds of magic one heard about in stories, very limited. It was impossible to see the future or the past. It could only see the present. The fortunate thing was that it was very, very good at seeing the present. Such as the fact that one Sumeragi Yuhei was now sneaking up behind a far-seeing Naruto, and he really ought to get out of the trance before she dunked him. For a good 30 seconds, Naruto could dimly make out the woman's laughter as he thrashed about under the water. Then the pressure on his neck eased up and he pushed himself out, glowering at the woman as she continued to laugh. Naruto-sama, you should really learn how to remain aware of yourself when divining. His only response was to splash her with water. She took a look at herself, then at him, and then smirked. Naruto-sama, I didn't know you wanted to get me all wet. Naruto dunked his head underwater again. Mitsuomi's lesson had been as brutal as usual. Dominating was not a strong enough word to describe the man's combat potential. Naruto was fairly adequate with Hakyokuken at this point, though neither he nor Mitsuomi would have suggested he was near mastery. Still, the child had expected that as he grew in skill, he might actually take fewer hits in their spars. It was as though every time he found a wellspring of power he previously had never tapped into and channeled it, Mitsuomi would simply step things up again and continue to pound him relentlessly. Much to Naruto's chagrin, soon after he started the lessons they had become something of a public spectacle. Mitsuomi had never discouraged it, and Naruto never felt particularly bothered by the attention, except when they started betting on how many hits he would take, how many times he would fall down. He got over that when he arranged a deal with Arisa and Mitsuomi and the three of them split the pot, a decent chunk of money. Mitsuomi had become something of a counselor for him, as well. Naruto loved the Reverend Mother, but there were some things, guy things, he had stammered out, that he just couldn't talk to her about. Most of these things actually had to do with weapon forms, and during the warm-up period and early sparring exercises Mitsuomi and he conversed about how to apply Hakyokuken to ninja weaponry. Results hadn't been very successful, at least thus far, but Naruto was never one to give up until all possibilities were explored, and even a few impossibilities. Some of those things, though, had caught Mitsuomi off guard. One time, Naruto had come to him with a very awkward question. Mitsuomi-sensei, catching the thrown punch and stepping in, rotating the leg from calf to hip to provide power to the driving elbow strike. Why does Yuhei-sensei touch me so much? The question had caught Mitsuomi so off guard that he forgot to dodge. Never again would he forget to dodge one of Naruto's attacks. The kid was strong. Other times, it was confidence issues, image problems, the usual things that plagued a young boy, and Mitsuomi had fielded them as easily as he did Naruto's strikes. He doled out answers and pain equally, and Naruto generally left every training session aching but a little wiser. So it was that the 9 o'clock bell tolled as Naruto was sent flying by a palm strike delivered into his wide-open chest. The official Sumeragi adjutant counted, and when Naruto hit the ground and tumbled, he smiled. 5 seconds of airtime, a new record for Mitsuomi-sama. Laughter sounded as a few went to help Naruto up onto his feet, before letting him stumble over to where his teacher was conversing with a few of the clansmen. Pausing in his conversation, he turned to face Naruto, who grinned up at him. Mitsuomi smiled in return. If he were ever pressed to admit it, he would confess that he loved the child like a son. His initial impression had been positive, and the child had very quickly began to grow on him. Which was part of why he beat the ever-living crap out of him. His job was to forge Naruto such that no physical threat was beyond neutralization. Even Mitsuomi knew it was impossible, but he was not going to half-ass the attempt. Good job, Naruto-sama. Every day you get a little better. If you keep this up, I may run out of things to teach you soon. It was an outright lie, and everyone knew it, but the praise inherent was more than enough for Naruto, who bowed and turned to go bother Arisa. Mitsuomi began to turn back, when he noticed Yuhei and the Reverend Mother engaged in what appeared like a rather lively conversation. Excusing himself, he walked over, and managed to catch the tail end of Yuhei's retort. He'd never forgive himself. He cleared his throat, and both women turned to glare at him. Inwardly, he was cowed, but he showed no reaction. Is there a problem I can mediate here? Maybe you can talk some sense into her. Yuhei growled. She has selected Arisa to pass within. Mitsuomi frowned, turned to face the Reverend Mother. I have no objection with Arisa. She is one of the strongest diviners, even if her combat ability is somewhat lacking compared to mine. She is well suited for the task. But she, the 27-year-old woman shook her head, gesturing at the Reverend Mother. She wants Naruto-sama to perform the rite. That floored Mitsuomi. Ever since he had been selected as her retainer, he had prepared himself for the inevitability of the rite to pass within. It was a process by which a member of the Sumeragi clan absorbed the knowledge and experiences of the Reverend Mother, and all that had come before her. However, to pass within and become a new Reverend Mother required one to partake of the heart's blood. The previous Reverend Mother had to sacrifice herself, and her retainer was the one that killed her. No wonder Yuhei had been so heated about refusing it. Mitsuomi steeled himself and then asked, "When is the ceremony to be done?" The look Yuhei gave him was one of shock and horror. He hated himself for asking it too, but there was a line he would not cross. Every decision the Reverend Mother made had been beneficial in some way or another. You can't be serious. You're going to make him. Yuhei sputtered. If the Reverend Mother believes that Naruto-sama stands to gain something from performing the rite, then it is not ours to question. He hated himself for saying it. The silence that resulted was long and uncomfortable. It will be in 3 years' time. There are certain things I must put into action first. The Reverend Mother finally spoke up. She, too, knew the terrible effects it would have on Naruto, but this was necessary. Such as teaching him how to control the beast within. Both Mitsuomi and Yuhei were stunned. You found a method? Yuhei was the first to ask. I believe so, yes. Let us adjourn to my home, and I will explain more. The Reverend Mother whispered. I need to lay down. Naruto-sama, Aiko, the wife of the head of the fifth branch, spoke. The Reverend Mother wishes to speak with you. When there was no response, she opened the door, and had to refrain from laughing. An 11-year-old Naruto was currently face up on the floor. Why me? Look on his face. His body completely entangled in the intricate robes of the ceremony. It would be his 4th time attending the Festival of the Dove, and he liked to dress up for it along with the rest of the Sumeragi. He just sucked at dressing appropriately by himself. Aiko-san, he whined, save me from myself. Now she had to laugh, and entered the room, helping him up. It took her a minute to set the robes straight, and then tie them properly, but at the end he grinned and hugged her. She smiled softly, and hugged him back, and wondered about herself. When he had first arrived, much like most of the village, she had been wary. When he had shown up to live there, she had been nervous, although the declaration that he felt safe amongst them had been so laced with irony. Not that they hadn't gained a lot of political capital as a result. Now, though, after 4 years living there, with him being so rambunctious and yet entirely willing to help everyone regardless of how they thought of him, she had grown to think of him as a son. And it hurt that she knew he would leave one day, and with every passing day it was coming closer. So she took the chances she got to spoil him, such as his rare days off, like this one. But he had business with the Reverend Mother, and that took precedence. She let him go, and wiped an errant tear from her eye. Go on, Naruto-sama. We've still got a few hours before the festival starts. Don't be too late, you hear? I wouldn't miss this for the world. The blonde yelled, before running off. Aiko chuckled, shook her head, and then moved off to find her other child. Aiko-san said you wanted to see me, Reverend Mother. Naruto spoke softly, greeting her in his traditional method. The presence of Mitsuomi and Yuhei was surprising, but he tried not to let it distract him. Instead, he focused entirely on the Reverend Mother, because something about her was off today. Naruto-sama, welcome. Now Naruto was certain something was going on. She seemed distracted, almost hesitant to speak to him. He began to chew his lip. Was he being evicted and sent back to Konoha? He didn't want that. Even as he opened his mouth, she uttered one word. Silence. And he closed his mouth. Naruto-sama, you are here today because we have found a solution to a problem you have faced, and we are ready to begin implementing it. A problem? A significant amount of your energy is devoted to containing something inside of you that lives at odds with your body. We have devised a treatment that we believe can align that thing, even partially, so that less of your energy is consumed by it. Yuhei explained softly, fidgeting. She was not a woman that fidgeted. Naruto was becoming increasingly worried. So, what's the big deal? You know acupuncture, yes? Naruto nodded. We will be using the needles, but the process by which one realigns an alien force to coexist is painful as a light expression. We want you to be fully aware that if you endure this treatment, it will hurt a great deal, and even then it may not be successful. But we believe that it can be. Do it, he said simply. Naruto-sama, please, take a moment and consider. Yuhei tried to interrupt. Do it. His tone brooked no argument, and after her mouth worked trying to find a counter, she finally closed it. Very well. Remove your clothing and lay down. The Reverend Mother instructed. Naruto looked at her in exasperation, and she was curious enough to ask him. What? Aiko-san had to help me get into these clothes not even 5 minutes ago. Do I really have to? Naruto-sama, all right. He grumbled, and undid the sash. He rolled back his shoulders and the robe slid down off of his back, and he shifted a bit uncomfortably under Yuhei's hungry stare. The combat instructor received a sharp glance from Mitsuomi and she shook her head, regained composure. Then he finished disrobing. Oh my, Yuhei said. It had been a solid 45 minutes since he had lain face down on a prepared mat, and Naruto was getting frustrated. The Reverend Mother and Mitsuomi had just finished probing the primary channels, softly explaining the procedure to him. After this treatment, you will need to learn to perform each yourself. He could make out Yuhei, who was preparing the needles, chanting a spell and infusing each with the properties they'd need for the treatment. We are ready, the Reverend Mother announced, and Naruto nodded. Shortly thereafter, he felt the first intrusion. The needle, he knew, was cold. The room, after all, was oddly cool. But when it pressed against his skin and began to sink in, he hissed from the sudden burn. Another, and he winced again, but bore it silently. 17 more times, he felt his Dumai meridian being pierced by needles. He felt the tip of the 20th and moaned audibly. Naruto-sama, this one will hurt. A great deal. Please, try and bear it. No wonder they picked one of the buildings on the edge of the enclave, Naruto thought dimly, trying to prepare himself for the onslaught of pain. The needle pierced. Naruto screamed. There was no describing the agony he felt. If he had to try, it was like having a broken leg set. But even when Mitsuomi had performed that rather gruesome duty, it had not hurt as much as this. His body convulsed, and Mitsuomi had to lunge forward and grapple him back down, resting most of his weight on top of the struggling child. Naruto-sama, please, you must calm yourself. There are 7 more extraordinary pathways we must readjust. The Reverend Mother intoned softly. After a moment, Naruto forced himself to still, though his breathing sped up significantly as he tried to swallow the pain. Mitsuomi felt a pang of regret, but Naruto had agreed to this, and it was in the child's best interest to finish the process. The Reverend Mother reached for the second set of needles. The process of 20 repeated itself. The 20th saw Naruto screaming and thrashing again, and it took severe effort from the large man to suppress him again. The third set went far easier, at least for Mitsuomi. Naruto screamed, but this time there was coherency, and his body did not spasm. I must not fearest mind killer, fearest the little death that brings total obliteration. The boy slammed his head into the mat, grimacing. Mitsuomi glanced at the Reverend Mother, who was looking at the boy in surprise. He knows the litany against fear. She shook her head. Better to continue the process quickly. But as she worked, she heard him whispering to himself, forcing his body to under his control. It showed an incredible amount of concentration. I will face my fear. Grunt. I will permit it to pass over me, wince, and through me. Hiss. And when it has gone, bark of pain. I will turn the inner eye to see its path. The 80th needle pierced his skin, and his head rose. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing, only I will remain. Thunk. He slammed his head down again. Yuhei set down the final needle, her hands now trembling as she listened to the pained noises and howls coming from Naruto. Unconsciously, she moved closer, reached out and took one of his hands in hers. As the Reverend Mother inserted another needle, his head rose, and Yuhei gasped. His eyes, she thought, shone with gratitude at her, but also some measure of hatred, as though by offering the hand, she was sapping his strength. She would never see that look again, but it would be imprinted on her memory forever. Naruto's world was one of pain. Sometime around the 120th needle, he had begun to intermittently phase in and out of consciousness. Many times, he thought he saw the visage of a giant red beast, mocking him. "You think you can control my power?" it taunted, its voice hellishly loud in Naruto's ears. "You think you can tame me? Foolish human. When you break, I will bring your body back here and kill these simple-minded idiots for their arrogance." Naruto was about to protest when he felt the spike of pain that indicated that another of the 8 extraordinary pathways had been completed. The giant monster even seemed a bit discomforted. Its voice no longer carried as much strength as it had before. "Remember, child, you will never make my power yours." And then he returned to consciousness, at once dimly aware that he was beginning to crack bones in Yuhei's hand from the strength of his grip. He looked up at her and saw nothing in her eyes but devotion and fear, not for herself, he noted, but for him, and forced his hand to relax. He saw her hiss at the loss of pressure and tried to say something, before pain lanced through his body again. "We are almost done, Naruto-sama," she whispered, "just hang on a little longer." Naruto began in on the litany again. It was all he could do to keep himself from moving. It seemed like an eternity before the final burst of pain ripped through him, and he howled. Yet, even as the pain lingered, he could feel something moving in his body. It was as though it was working faster, more efficiently than it had before. His breathing slowed. "Naruto-sama?" The Reverend Mother's voice cut through his reverie, and he blinked away the sudden exhaustion, grunting his awareness. "We'll be removing the needles now. This should hurt significantly less." And indeed, as she and Mitsuomi and Yuhei moved about recovering all 160 needles, Naruto could barely detect them. When the Reverend Mother spoke up, he finally sat up, instinctively reaching for his clothes to cover himself. Yuhei and the Reverend Mother respectfully gave him a bit of privacy as Mitsuomi helped him back into the ceremonial robes. At long last, they sat facing each other. "Do you feel any different, Naruto-sama?" Yuhei asked softly, still more than a little uncomfortable after the procedure. It was not, after all, a common thing in the Sumeragi enclave to watch a child undergo such hellish torture. Naruto frowned, took a few experimental swings of his arms. "Well, when you finished, it felt like my body was doing something differently. I'm not as tired as I was a minute ago. But I don't feel that different. It may take a bit of time," the Reverend Mother stated softly. "In the meanwhile, if you feel that you're able, you should attend the festival. Yuhei, if you would escort Naruto-sama back to the 5th branch?" "Of course, Reverend Mother." "Naruto-sama? Just a moment." He seemed pensive, and then nodded to himself. "There's something inside me, isn't there?" At the shocked expressions he received, he smiled slightly. "I knew it. After a while, I stopped seeing things that were there. And instead there was this giant thing. A fiery shadow. And it told me that I would never be able to make its power mine. What is this thing, and why haven't I been told about it?" There was a minute of uncomfortable silence. Then, at last, the Reverend Mother spoke. "It is something that you must discuss with the ones who sent you here. We are not fit to explain what has happened to you, and why. You can't tell me or you won't tell me." Naruto stared at her. The old crone shrugged. "A little of both." Her tone was completely even. "That's not fair. You're keeping things from me that I have a right to know about myself." "What the hell is this?" "Enough." Mitsuomi roared, and Naruto froze. There were certain lines that one did not cross in Mitsuomi's presence. Using foul language was one of those things. "Fine." Naruto stood, robotically, giving his teachers an empty look. "I understand. I can make it back by myself, thank you. I am well enough. Naruto-sama, Yuhei started, but Naruto didn't stay long enough to let her finish. She looked on as he stormed away and then shook her head. Reverend Mother, that was completely necessary. The elderly woman interrupted. Naruto-sama must leave this village soon. But he has lived here for a third of his life, and most of his conscious memories are likely of this village. He will be hesitant to leave. I have given him a reason to leave. He wants to know more about himself now that he knows there is more to know. When the rite to pass within is completed, he will have no reason to stay here, and at long last he will go. It was never meant for him to stay here. She sighed and looked down at her hands. Mitsuomi had certainly had a harsh job restraining Naruto at first, and if Yuhei had made a mistake in blending her spiritual energy with the needles, there was no telling what might have gone wrong with the procedure. But it could be said with no exaggeration that the Reverend Mother had taken on the harshest job herself. Her left hand, that she had used to steady the point of insertion, was severely burnt from eruptions of energy, as were the fingers of her right hand. She fought through the pain, just as he did, with the litany against fear and the teachings she had learned. A human can resist any pain. Mitsu-chan, please bring me some ice. Yuhei, keep an eye on him at the festival. If he shows any signs of decay, we need to know immediately. Both of her pupils nodded and excused themselves, and she sighed. That boy, does he not know it hurts me as much as it hurts him? Fortunately for the enclave, Naruto did not let the anger that had consumed him as he left endure for long. Even as he approached the porch where Arisa, Aiko, and various others gathered, he was smiling. As he was swarmed by many of his young friends, all vying for attention, his eyes met Arisa's and he grinned. There's no reason to let crap like that ruin a perfectly good day. Who wants to play? A roar answered him. Not 5 minutes after he had started the game, he excused himself, and the children played on, running amok and causing general chaos to the delight and amusement of most of the adults watching. He walked over and joined the group relaxing on the porch, and watched them with a grin. They were his little brothers and sisters. It took off a lot of the edge to see them having such fun. Naruto-sama, you won't be playing? Nanase asked, looking up from a robe she was stitching. Nah, I'm saving my energy for tonight. At a few puzzled glances, he smiled, embarrassed. I sort of, made a lot of promises tonight. If I want to do everything I promised, I need to be at my best. Promises, Naruto-sama? Aiko smirked. I didn't realize you had matured enough to be doing such things. My, he's grown up so fast. Half of the group laughed as Naruto blushed and stared down at his feet. It's nothing like that. Rin asked me to get her 5 prizes, and Shinichi wanted me to help him with some origami and, stuff like that. He grumbled softly and the assembly smirked. Yuhei-san didn't ask you for anything, Naruto-sama? En asked, with a grin that might best be described as lecherous. Naruto hesitantly nodded. Oh, I do wonder what she asked for then. A little stress relief? Out in the forest, mayhaps? Naruto coughed as Nanase lightly smacked her husband's head. She, wanted a massage. There was a long silence as the Sumeragi stared at him, jaws slightly agape. Then, Sumeragi Arata, the heir of the 4th branch, spoke the words that every male who had heard him was thinking. Naruto-sama, you are one lucky son of a bitch. If you say so, the youth smiled awkwardly and then, with a shark's grin, decided to turn the question around. So how about you, Arata? I do hope you're planning to do something nice for Arisa Nichan tonight. A massage yourself? Or maybe a walk to the lake? The lake was generally considered the romantic reclusive spot for the Sumeragi, and young couples often ran there to be away from prying eyes for hours at a time. Oh, the scandal. Arata and Arisa both flushed deeply, and Naruto grinned as he realized he had hit on something after all. There were joking oohs, and Arata received a fair bit of needling elbows while Aiko tried to find it in herself not to laugh at how red her daughter was getting. Well, Naruto-sama, we may in fact be doing something like that. But I'm sure it won't be as momentous as yours. That earned him an elbow from Arisa. Naruto-sama, the blushing girl smirked. I do hope you don't forget about our promise. Arata promptly spit out his drink, and Naruto winced. After all, my night won't be complete until you give it to me. More than a few people spit their drinks out. Everyone knew that the relationship between Arisa and Naruto was familial and not romantic, but the prospect was there in front of them. Yeah, the blonde grumbled, feeling he had to work quickly to get the Sumeragi clan's collective minds out of the gutter. The tree is in my room, I just have to make a few more selective cuts and it'll be done. You can't rush this stuff, Arisa Nichan. Naruto-sama has been trimming a bald cypress for Arisa. He promised it to her as a present for the festival about half a year ago and he's been working on it since. Aiko clarified. A collective, rang, and Arata managed to compose himself again. Arisa gave him a heartless grin, and he grimaced, his yes dear signal of defeat. So when is the festival starting? Naruto wondered aloud. What took you so long to ask, Naruto-sama? Nanase smiled. As if on cue, the streets of the enclave came alive as hundreds of people filled up the booths. Music played, and the children halted their game in favor of the new entertainment. The festival begins whenever anyone wants it to. He smiled, she returned it, and as when the group got up and moved into the crowd. It was going on 8 o'clock, nearly 7 straight hours of non-stop amusement. Naruto had spent the day with his various charges, and even took over 2 booths to allow their owners to enjoy the festival themselves for a few hours. Naruto was finally taking a break to relax himself, seated inside his room and pondering the cypress in front of him. It was bothering him that he wasn't sure where to go with it. He knew, instinctively, that he was nearly done with the tree, but the final few cuts were eluding him. He hummed thoughtfully and reached forward, made an incision and collected the branch. Well, that's a part of it. Naruto-sama? The child jumped, startled, and turned to look. Yuhei stood in the doorway, smiling. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I had no idea you were into bonsai. Well, I'm not really good at it, but it helps to calm me down. I promised that I'd deliver this tree to Arisa Nichan before the end of the festival, and I need just another few cuts before it's finished. These last ones are kind of hard to determine though. He smiled at her, returned his attention to the tree. He was aware that she had entered his room and closed the door, arranging herself on the floor next to him. But he didn't have to fight to keep his concentration. He had made a promise, after all, and he was going to keep it. For the next hour, there was complete silence as Naruto contemplated his moves, rejecting each in turn. His peace turned into frustration, and finally he growled and set the clippers down. I can't figure out how to go from here. Everything I can think of, it just seems to ruin the entire design. He sat, frustrated, pouting, and Yuhei couldn't help but smile at his devotion to the girl he considered his sister. Well, Naruto-sama, if I may suggest. He gave her a curious look, but nodded. Why not act on instinct? But, what if I make a mistake? I want this to be perfect for Arisa Nichan. Sometimes, Naruto-sama, perfection is too cold. And I doubt that Arisa-san would mind if it wasn't perfect. She'll love it because it's from you. She watched him contemplate and scooted herself behind him, leaned in, and took his hands into hers. Just close your eyes. She brought his hand to the clippers, lifted them up and brought them to the tree, and go on instinct. Naruto's face was slightly red from the close contact, but he did as directed, closed his eyes, and entered his meditative state. He could feel the pressure from Yuhei reduce itself as she withdrew, could feel his hands moving on their own, and could feel a sense of completion at last. When he opened his eyes, he saw the tree exactly as he had envisioned it, and set the clippers down. A smile worked its way over his face, and when he looked over at Yuhei, tears were in his eyes. In a move that surprised her, he jumped at her, burying his face in her stomach. Yuhei-sensei, thank you. Thank you so much. Just as suddenly as he had approached her, he withdrew. I need to get this to Arisa Nichan. Yuhei-sensei, I'll be right back. She barely acknowledged him, a bit surprised at the sudden tackle, and fanned herself when she finally came back to herself. True to Naruto's word, it was not more than 10 minutes before he returned, a huge grin on his face. She smiled up at him, and tilted her head. Well, she loved it, just like you said, Yuhei-sensei. I can't thank you enough, really. He started to ramble, and she reached up and cupped his face in her hands, cutting him off as he stared at her. Naruto-sama, you don't have to thank me. I'm glad that she loved it. She let him go, and then drew herself upright. I'll see you in 2 days for your lessons, Naruto-sama. And then she was walking away toward the door, when he suddenly called out to her. Yuhei-sensei, I did promise something for you, didn't I? She turned, smiled. Naruto-sama, I got to spend a bit of time with you. That's all I wanted, but that's not what I promised. I'm a man, I keep my promises. He managed to sound out. He looked up at her and smiled. I owe you for your help. And I keep my promises. So, please, let me keep this one too. She gazed at him and then chuckled softly. All right, Naruto-sama. Just this once. She closed the door again, and Naruto rolled out the futon. Just go ahead and lay down, Yuhei-sensei. Aiko-san says I'm pretty good, so. Does she? Yuhei mused, while undoing the obi that kept her robes cinched shut. Yuhei-sensei, I'm not sure that's entirely necessary. The boy averted his gaze, and the woman chuckled before finishing shucking the robe and laying face down on the futon. On the contrary, Naruto-sama, I believe it is very necessary. After a long moment, Naruto felt brave enough to begin. Lucky son of a bitch, indeed. How is the prana bindu training, Naruto-sama? The Reverend Mother asked. Naruto, now another year older, had finally completed his truncated course on Onmyo theory. However, custom and the occasional refresher course brought him to her classroom every morning, and she was always happy to oblige him. Her question was related to a recent branch of training Mitsuomi was putting him through. Prana bindu, developing full control over every individual muscle in the body. The blonde lifted his head out of the book he was reading, some trashy romantic drama based in the Third Great Shinobi War. Icha Icha Conquest, it was titled. Aiko had given it to him, giggling and stating that in it contained all of the necessary information to make women happy. It had taken him a week to get through half of the book, mostly because he kept setting it down from irritation. Who writes this trash? Naruto mused to himself. Somewhere in the tea country, Jiraiya sneezed, revealing his presence to several women in a hot springs resort. It's going well enough, I think. I no longer get tired after doing it for 5 minutes, so he's been pushing me to 10. He says that the power in every strike is greatly increased, but I don't really feel it. The blonde smiled abashedly. Sometimes I think Mitsuomi-sensei gives me a bit too much praise. But he's already started me adopting the training into Hakkyokuken, along with something else. He never gave me the name of it, but the basic concept, according to Mitsuomi-sensei, is something like, my mind affects my reality. He says that when I've completed the training, if I imagine myself in a position related to an opponent, I'll get there through sheer force of will. The Reverend Mother chuckled. Mitsu-chan has all sorts of interesting practices. I helped him develop the prana bindu, but he applied it to his martial arts all on his own. Because we Sumeragi believe in the power of the mind, it is only natural that he would apply the same to his technique. And I don't think I've seen him proven wrong yet. I hope it won't. The child nodded. Still, it's pretty fun, if tiring. At least it gives me a reason to see Mitsuomi-sensei outside of showing up now and again to get my ass beat into the ground. This may shock you, but I miss the days when every hour was filled with lessons. Ever since I graduated, it's been kind of boring. The Reverend Mother chuckled. Oh, things won't be boring for too long, Naruto-sama. In fact, I imagine you'll be quite busy in a week or two. Really? He finally set the book down, sitting upright to watch her. What's going to happen? Well, I'll tell you, but you have to promise to keep it a secret until I tell her myself. I've selected Arisa to pass within and become the next Reverend Mother. And I'm going to need your help in order to perform the ceremony properly. Ah, well, in that case, sure, I'll do my best to help out. Anything for Arisa Nichan, he exclaimed happily. His enthusiasm was short-lived though, as he sighed and picked up the book, laying back down. Aiko-san had better be right about this book. Naruto woke up the day of the rite with a cold feeling in his stomach. He moved through his morning dully, as though something sapped at his strength. He should have felt excited for Arisa, and he was. She was inheriting a great responsibility and he was proud that his surrogate sister had been selected over everyone else to become the new Reverend Mother. But he knew, he could just tell, that by the time the day was over, something terrible would have happened. Naruto-sama, do you feel ill? Aiko asked him at breakfast, and he looked up, managed a smile. No, I feel fine. Something just feels off about today. Maybe you're just upset that Arisa is receiving attention today instead of you? She smiled, and Naruto had to laugh. She knew, the entire enclave knew, that Naruto despised any special treatment. Anything that could set him apart, he threw aside. It was how so many had grown to accept the child as part of their families. Doubtless, the legal battle to adopt him would have been a nightmare at best. Maybe you're just jittery because you'll be assisting in the ceremony. Do you know what your role will be? He shook his head. I just know that I'm supposed to do something for the Reverend Mother, and then pass it on to Arisa Nichan so that she can become the new Reverend Mother. But she hasn't told me what I'm supposed to do exactly. Hopefully it's nothing embarrassing. Well, I'm certain that you'll define. After all, it's not like anyone will be watching. To my understanding, it's just to be you, Arisa, the Reverend Mother, Yuhei-san, and Mitsuomi-san. No one else will be attending. We simply wait until the ceremony is over, and then congratulate Arisa on her new position. Aiko smiled, reached out, and patted Naruto's shoulder. You will do well, Naruto-sama. I hope so. He whispered in return. At that moment, Mitsuomi appeared, bowing to Aiko, who smiled and greeted him, and addressed Naruto. The Reverend Mother demands your presence to commence the rite to pass within. Do you, Sakurazuka Naruto, swear to perform the duties of the rite without failure, regardless of what is asked of you? Naruto had been told that the process would be formal. He rearranged himself to face Mitsuomi, and then nodded. I swear it. Good. Mitsuomi smiled tightly, and the cold fear in Naruto's stomach crystallized. Whatever was going on was affecting Mitsuomi as well. Remember, you have sworn to do as you are commanded. You do not have room to renege on this. Understood? I understand. Are we going, then? Naruto stood up as Mitsuomi nodded. Arisa-sama and the Reverend Mother are ready, and Yuhei-san is addressing those in the village about their duties. As soon as we arrive, the ceremony will begin. Then let's go. The sooner this is over with, the better. The man looked pained at the insinuation, and Naruto could feel the dread continuing to rise in him. When Mitsuomi finally realized that he had not answered, he smiled that same tight, grimacing smile. Yes, let's go, Naruto-sama. Naruto bowed to Aiko, excused himself, and left with Mitsuomi. It took a minute before Naruto felt comfortable enough to speak. What is my role in the ceremony? You are to do whatever the Reverend Mother asks you to do. No questions, just compliance. Anyone can do that. Why was I chosen? The Reverend Mother named you. Do you contest her wisdom? No, of course not. I'm just worried that I'll make an ass out of myself because I don't know what to do. You don't need to worry about that, Naruto-sama. The rite is simple enough. That doesn't make me feel any better. Sorry. They walked in silence, finally nearing the building that would serve as the grounds for the rite. As Naruto entered, he saw Yuhei look up at him, her eyes blurred with tears, and she managed a smile for him, so he gave her a fake one in return. All attempts at consolation failed, because Naruto had no idea what he was consoling for. He just knew that something bad was coming. Reverend Mother, Mitsuomi called, we have arrived. There was no response for a heartbeat, and then door on the left side of the room slid open. The Reverend Mother, dressed in robes of office for once, hobbled her way over to the futon. She saw Naruto and smiled gently and warmly, and the child could not help but feel better. She always calmed him down. With her around, nothing would go wrong. For the first time and last time that day, he smiled genuinely. Naruto-sama, she whispered, though he could hear every word. You know not your role in this affair, am I correct? You are nervous because you worry that you may make some mistake. Do not worry, your job in this affair is simple. But it is the most important task. You must not fail. If you do, then everything will have been for naught. Do you understand? Naruto frowned, but nodded. This was unlike her. Are you going to tell me what I have to do now? Yes. As you know, this is the rite to pass within. What you don't know is what it means. When a new Reverend Mother is given the rite, she takes in the essence and memories of all who came before her. And in order for her to take in my essence, I must give it to her, and give up my life. Naruto felt his stomach twist. There is an ancient technique passed down from one Reverend Mother to the next that allows us to imprint everything we are into our blood. It is concentrated most strongly in the heart. When the rite commences, you will take my life, take my heart's blood, and feed it to Arisa. She will enter a trance, and when she exits it she will have absorbed the essence of all who came before her as the new Reverend Mother. No, 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 no. You can't ask me to do this. Naruto had already moved to stand, and was backing away. Terror was written on his face, and his eyes were tearing up. In some way, he was already acknowledging it, but he had to try anyways. I refuse. I can't kill you. How could you ask me to do something like that? His retreat was very quickly halted. Mitsuomi grasped him, and he struggled, but no matter how hard he fought he could not break free from his mentor's grip. Naruto-sama, if there were any other way, I would. If there were anyone else I could ask to do this right, I would ask them and spare you this pain. But this serves many purposes at once. You must understand, your presence here means that you have sworn to do as asked. You know that I can compel you to obey against your will, but I would never do that to you. She closed her eyes. Naruto-sama, consider this the last request from me. Perform this right. Only you can. Don't ask me to do this. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, and tears now ran freely down his face. Please, don't ask me to do this. Naruto-sama, please, help me. All right. He had known, from the moment that she revealed what his job was, that he would accept. But a part of him was praying fervently that this was just a bad dream. To kill the woman that was a mother to him in all but name for some stupid ritual? There was no way it could really happen. But here he was, preparing to do just that. Because he had known, from the start, that this was the only option he had. That didn't make accepting it any easier. I'll do it. Naruto-sama, thank you. Tears, of gratitude or of sorrow, he wondered, streamed down her cheeks, and she bowed to him. He was dimly aware of Yuhei and Mitsuomi bowing to him as well. He felt ill, and his head was starting to pound. His blood boiled and ran cold at intervals. He was, to put it simply, a mess. Please, do whatever is necessary to prepare yourself. I will send for Arisa-sama and we shall begin. Naruto could not really hear her, but he understood the words anyways. He stared at his own trembling hands, uncomprehending of the words being said around him, but always taking their meaning. And shortly thereafter, his mind was wrenched from the conscious world, deposited across from a faceless shade. In the far background he could make out an enormous cage that housed something, and Naruto could guess what. Hey, brat, the shade said, you seem like you're having a tough time. Want me to help you out? Naruto blinked. Help me out? Help me how? Simple. I take over your body, kill the crone for you. No guilt for you, since I was the one who did it, and you've done what she wanted you to do. And I get to kill someone again. Everyone wins. The shade seemed to shimmer with glee, and Naruto shivered. There was something sinister about it. I don't know. Come on, kid, you know you don't want to kill her. I'm a professional at this stuff. I won't hesitate, she'll get her wish and we can all move on from here. Naruto stared at the shade. Then he at last shook his head. No, I don't trust you, and the Reverend Mother asked me to do this. I can't just pawn this off on someone else. Hey, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. The shade began to laugh in genuine mirth. Naruto recoiled, and the shade began to approach him, kneeling in front of the child. Kid, you're amusing, I'll give you that. But I will take this body someday. As long as you refrain from becoming me, someday you will break and I will be free at last. As for now, well, the amusement has worn off, and you're starting to irritate me. Be gone. The shade, before Naruto could say anything else, waved his hand, and Naruto abruptly felt his true vision return. Tasama? He blinked his eyes a few times, readjusting them, saw Yuhei above him, worry etched on her features. Moke. He grunted, and finally sat himself up. He saw Arisa, who was looking at him with a pensive frown, and managed a false smile to try and ease her worry. Really, I'm fine, now. He turned to the Reverend Mother, and nodded. Let's get this over with. Very well. She cleared her throat, and when she spoke again, her voice was powerful, almost youthful in its energy. Sumeragi Arisa, you know that you have been selected as the next Reverend Mother. Are you aware of the duties and responsibilities that will be placed on your shoulder once you have assumed this mantle? Arisa sat upright, shook her head to recenter herself, and nodded. I understand, Reverend Mother. Naruto-sama. The child snapped upright, looked at her. It is time for you to fulfill your duty. He nodded, his body trembling almost uncontrollably now. He took a moment, and ran through a basic prana bindu exercise. Almost instantly, his body stilled itself, though his eyes continued to vibrate wildly with terror at what he was to perform. I understand. Step after step, taken with leaden feet, he approached the Reverend Mother. He knelt in front of her, and hugged her, receiving one in return. Tears again began to fall. Are you sure? I have waited a long time for this, Naruto-sama. He nodded, and then released her from the hug. Arisa, who had been watching, was now certain that something was off. Especially when Naruto raised his right arm and bent the elbow, his fingers arranged in a speared IP, ready to punch through the elderly woman. Naruto, what are you doing? She blurted out. You can't mean to. This is the right to pass within, Arisa-sama. Mitsuomi spoke coldly. You inherit the memories and powers of all of the reverend mothers who came before you. In order to precipitate this inheritance, she must give her life and her blood to you. Naruto-sama has been entrusted with the task of making certain that the transfer goes flawlessly. But he can't kill her. He's just a child. Naruto-sama is the Sakurazukamori. Whether we like it or not, whether he likes it or not, killing is something he will do. At least this death will have meaning. Yuhei whispered. Naruto, please. Listen, you can't. Arisa tried again, but he didn't seem to hear her. Indeed, he was too busy watching the Reverend Mother through teary eyes. You are my mother. I don't want to do this to you. She smiled. Naruto-sama, you were like a son to me. But what kind of mother would I be if I did not challenge my son and prepare him for the road ahead of him? Your life was not meant to be spent here. There is so much more that you can and should do. You would wither here, decay here, and we would decay with you. No, you have to leave, and this is one way of making it happen. She touched his forehead, closed her eyes. You are a bright star, Naruto-sama. Change the world. I understand. He closed his eyes, choked back a sob. And then he thrust his right hand forward. Her body spasmed in his arms, but she smiled in bliss. Naruto-sama, return to Konohagakure no Sato. The questions that so plague you about your ancestry and history, you will find all of your answers there. He nodded slowly, and as she closed her eyes for the last time, he withdrew his hand, slick with blood. He rose, then turned to Arisa. Arisa Nichan, don't refuse this. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain. Please. She could not respond, but for a little nod. Naruto approached her, knelt again, and presented his bloody hand. Hesitantly, she reached forward and licked at the blood coating it. Naruto held deathly still. When she was done, her eyes looked distinctly blank, before her body swayed. Mitsuomi rushed forward, caught her, and then laid her down gently. Naruto rose mechanically, and turned. He half walked, half stomped away, but nobody moved to follow him. The small part of his consciousness that was not in shock was grateful for it. He returned to the place that housed him, returned to his room ignoring all questions, and simply collapsed, surrendering to blessed unconsciousness. It was hours later, as the sun began to set, that Sumeragi Arisa made her way to what was no longer her home. She would reside in the Reverend Mother's abode, as was custom. But she had one errand she needed to run. It bugged her that her family bowed to her, treated her so respectfully, but she knew that it was unavoidable. She smiled, thanked them all, and asked for Naruto. She entered the room, saw the child laying face down on the floor, and smiled sadly, before sitting next to him. Naruto, she started, I don't know how to thank you enough. I know the sacrifice you made for the both of us, for all of us. She looked upon you as her son, much like I did and do, and always will. I know that you blame yourself, but you shouldn't. She didn't, I don't. You had a role to play. It was the only choice you had. I know your life will be difficult. It should never be easy for you to kill, but I know that this more than any other will always linger in your mind. I wish it wouldn't. You did the right thing today, Naruto. And I hope that you always will. I have faith in your kindness. Grow strong, grow wise, and lead your people. That is the kind of person you have the potential to become. She leaned down, and kissed the top of his head. I love you, Naruto, like you were my own flesh and blood. So long as you live, please, never forget that. Then, she rose and left. For 5 minutes, the room was completely still, and then the body began to stir. Slowly, unsurely, the blonde lifted himself up, and then regarded the hands as though it was the first time he had seen them. And, truthfully, it was, through these eyes. He stood himself up, and paced around the room to get control. Not too bad, kid. Let's go for a walk, shall we? The blonde left the room, walked down the hall, silently, and then exited the building. Now, what to do? It was then that he spotted Yuhei crossing the main square by herself, heading in the direction of her home, and he grinned. Perfect. He pumped his legs, running after her, and waved, affecting Naruto's mannerisms. Yuhei-sensei. The woman started at the sound of the voice, and turned. Naruto-sama? As he closed to her, he could make out puffy red eyes, and snorted inwardly. What are you doing out and about so late? You must be feeling tired. I felt like taking a walk. Well, it technically wasn't a lie. Just to think. I see. She responded softly. Yuhei-sensei, can I talk to you about something? Of course, Naruto-sama. What is it? Well, it's kind of private. If we could. He motioned toward her house, and she nodded. They walked, making small talk, and at last when they were alone, they sat facing each other. After a moment, though, Yuhei fixed him with a penetrating gaze. You are not Naruto-sama. Sharp woman. No, I'm not. I am what you would call the essence of the Sakurazukamori. Thanks to the event that happened earlier, the kid's mind is currently undergoing some maintenance so that it doesn't fracture. I have to admit, he's resolute. In fact, really, it seems like it's made him stronger than it was before. I don't have too long to stay here before he takes back over, so I'd really like to take the time to sow a little mischief, as it were. Fighting with that beast over the vacancy really took a lot out of me. So, Sakurazukamori-sama, what do you have need of me for? She frowned. He smirked. She was so obviously tense and on guard, even a twitch would be liable to set her off. Well, most of it is because I dislike your obvious lack of respect for me. He raised his hand to forestall any comment, grinning. You think that I didn't notice? You act like such a slut puppy around the kid not because you are attracted to him, but because you fear me. You try to make yourself intimate with him so that you can use that as a shield against me. Did you really think that a body could persuade a professional assassin like me? I kill whomever I want, whenever I want. I am not so easily swayed. She looked downward. So, now what? Are you here to kill me for insulting you? No, not at all. You see, right now, the beast is much stronger in the kid than I am. If I killed you and the kid woke up and saw that, he would probably break. I wouldn't be able to gain control over the mind. I'm all for killing, but not indiscriminate pillaging. He sniffed imperiously. I will make my move when I know that I am stronger than the beast. But I am here to punish you for the insult. He watched her shift and squirm, and grinned savagely. Give me your hands. Hesitantly, she placed her hands out in front of her. The Sakurazukamori took her right hand, and traced a burning pentagram into the back of it, then repeated the process with the left. This marks you as the Sakurazukamori's prey. He leaned in. Sumeragi Yuhei, he breathed into her ear, let's make a bet. Naruto had woken up only 2 hours ago, but had been busy ever since. He was preparing for his trip back to Konoha. He would leave in the dead of night, when there were no goodbyes to be said. He wanted to be back early in the morning. He had a lot of things he needed to clear up. At long last, he hefted his pack, and whispered an apology to the clan. As the midnight hour approached, Sakurazuka Naruto left the Sumeragi enclave with not a word, and never looked back. It was maybe 8:30 in the morning when Naruto entered Konoha proper. His memories of the place were fragmented at worst, but he was fairly certain that it hadn't always consisted of scattered broken houses and damaged shops. The further he went into the town, the less it seemed in a state of disrepair, but carpenters, and even a few ninjas, if the Hittite were any indication, were swarming over buildings and through the village. The child shook his head, continued on. This was not looking good. Had he forgotten the way back? Maybe. He hesitantly asked a villager, and received an affirmation that yes, this was Konohagakure no Sato. He blanched. After taking a moment to scout out the village, his memory began to return to him. With a bit more certainty, he made his way toward the Hokage Tower, dancing out of the way of several kids running amok in the streets. He couldn't help but smile, and raised his hand to call out to them, but thought better of it. No, he couldn't just call out to them. He didn't know any of them. He winced, then retracted his hand, and continued walking. After an uncomfortable 5 minutes walking through an unfamiliar place filled with people who were too busy to say a word to him, aside from a few who answered a question here and there, he reached his destination, and winced again. Hokage Tower was not broken, but it sure looked battered. Chunks of wall were missing in various points, and scorch marks bore testament to some kind of conflict. With a bit more urgency, Naruto began his trek up. As he neared the top, where he knew the old man's office would be, he heard the increasingly loud sounds of an argument. And it was not just a few people. There were a lot of people arguing. Naruto gulped silently, reached for the door, and opened it. It did not creak, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. Immediately he searched the room for familiar faces. He couldn't see any, not even the old man's. Mild panic began to seize him, but he forced himself to remain calm, and felt himself unclench shortly thereafter. He had to remind himself to work on Prana Bindu again when he had the opportunity. He still wasn't exhibiting the control he needed. Even as he calmed though, he felt eyes focus on him. He had not said anything, and judging by the commotion, nobody had paid any heed to his entrance, but he scanned the crowd, and finally noticed. A pair of nearly white eyes stared at him from across the room. The man was fairly tall and wore light colors, with long black hair and expressionless white eyes. It was obvious that the man expected him to back down. Naruto didn't. There was no motion between the two of them until at long last the man looked away, the slight hint of a smile playing across his lips. Naruto shook his head. What a weird guy. Then the door opened again, and whoever opened it didn't pay attention to who happened to be in front of it. The blonde felt an impact against his back, heard a startled yelp, and the next thing he knew he was falling forward. Instinct took over, and he shoved his hand down, his index and middle knuckles impacting the ground and rendering him, and the person who had tripped over him, stationary. All conversation stopped with the yelp, and the room turned. Naruto looked up. The person who was now resting fairly comfortably on his body looked down at him. Purple hair half blocked his view, but he knew that face. Yugo Nichan? Naruto-kun? A light breeze wafted through the room as nobody spoke. The Anbu commander, Azuki Yugo, was currently being suspended off the floor by the body of a young blonde. A rather familiar-looking blonde, though many were at a loss to explain why. That name, Naruto, had once meant something. Something they didn't like. Uzumaki Naruto. Hyuga Hiyashi, the first person to recognize the child, and the first person to stare him down, spoke. I believe I speak for the council when I say, welcome back. Well, to be frank, no, he didn't, and he was well aware that he was not speaking for the council, but he was a Hyuga, and there were certain social norms that he followed out of habit. Plus, though he couldn't define it, he felt something about the boy that was piquing his interest. More than a few gasps of realization followed Hiyashi's proclamation. Yugo had the grace, at least, to finally stand on her own strength, looking down at the child in more than a little surprise. He had been gone for 5 years, so much had happened recently, she regretted to admit it, but she had completely forgotten about the blonde. Get your facts right, Naruto stated simply. There isn't anyone named Uzumaki Naruto here. Various comments raced through the assembly. Now that they looked at him, there was no mistaking him. This was Uzumaki Naruto, the village pariah, the seal of Kyuubi. So why was he denying it? Don't play games with this council, child. An elderly man spoke. His voice carried the weight of command, and Naruto's blood ran cold with it. That was a voice that he could never forget, not after hearing it so often in the Sandame's room. He turned to face Danzo, and grinned mercilessly. No games. Uzumaki Naruto is no longer on this earth. And here he gestured at himself with his thumb, am Sakurazuka Naruto. The Uzumaki clan is dead. I am the continuation of the proud Sakurazuka clan. A hush ran through the chamber as the council digested these words. This child was really claiming to be the heir of the Sakurazuka? Was it true? There was no real way to confirm unless he used Onmyojutsu, but even then, how could this child, who was now nearing 13 years old, have killed the previous Sakurazuka when the combined efforts of many of Konoha's elite ninja failed? Danzo snorted. The Sakurazuka family name is granted only to members of the Sakurazuka clan. Several other council members nodded alongside him. Hiyashi looked at the boy with a bit of unveiled interest. Really, if he's who he says he is, then this meeting may be quite fortuitous. If you're going to claim that you have inherited the Sakurazuka surname by any legitimate. Whatever Danzo would have said was cut short by a veritable storm of sakura that began to whirl around the room. Naruto held one petal in between his thumb and index finger gently, holding it up. The council members looked around them in more than a little surprise and consternation. This beast had just gotten even scarier. Now that he had these powers, and worse yet seemed to have some ability to use them, he would move about as he wished, since few knew how to combat such power. It was terrifying for them, and Naruto could practically feel their fears growing exponentially as the storm of sakura continued. He rolled his eyes. Let the old bastards think what they want. He failed to notice, however, Danzu's level gaze. The man was trying his best to restrain the downright evil grin that was threatening to spill across his face. He had wanted to use the boy as a weapon all those years ago when he was simply the Kyuubi container. Now he was something more, and that made the prospect all the more enticing. He would have to discuss the necessary political maneuvers with his allies at a later time. Naruto smiled, but Yugo saw something underneath the smile that worried her. The illusion slowly died, and the Sakura faded into nothingness. I am Sakurazuka Naruto. I've been away from Konoha for a long time. I'd like to talk to the old man Hokage. As soon as possible, please. Even Danzo managed to look stricken by the boy's words, and he frowned. Politeness had never been his strong front, but they had never been this quiet. His words had been phrased to get the largest rise out of them, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. He turned to Yugo, who looked uneasily at the counselors. I believe that's enough for today. I need to commandeer the office for a little bit. Their previous discussions almost completely forgotten by the sudden revelation of Naruto's return and heritage, they could do little but nod numbly, and began to file out. The last person out was Hiashi, who looked down at Naruto. You are certainly something, child. We should meet, I may have a few things to discuss with you. The boy looked at him, and then shrugged. We'll see. Hiashi twitched. Excuse me? I'm a busy guy. If I have time, we'll see about meeting. Until then, I have nothing to say. Not until I learn what's happened here since I left. Now, if you'll excuse us? Naruto eyed him levelly, and Hiashi had to give it to the child. He had a knack for igniting irritation and squelching any desire to drag out the confrontation. With a nod, Hiashi left. Naruto waited a moment, and then turned his attention back to Yugo, who had collapsed into the chair that the old man sat in. Yugo Nichan, what happened to the old man Hokage? Naruto-kun, Sandaime-sama is dead. I'm sorry? The child spoke, staring at Yugo. I could have sworn you just said that the old man is dead. He is. The purple-haired Anbu commander managed through a thick throat. When Konoha was attacked, he gave his life to defend it. Thunk. Naruto sat on the floor, staring up at her. He said nothing, just stared, and she could not find it in herself to look away from him. Finally, he managed to swallow past whatever it was that prevented him from saying anything, but his question caught her off guard. What happened? Yugo blinked, and then sighed to herself. She stood up, walked around the desk, and grabbed a chair from the side of the room. The council never seemed to like to sit down when they held meetings in this room, and brought it over. Sit, please. This could take a while. He made a grateful noise, and plopped down again, still looking shell-shocked from the announcement. The elegant woman returned to her seat, and tried to gather herself. The Chunin exams took place about a month ago. Sanagakure no Sato hosted them. Many of the Junin sensei volunteered their teams, so we were already weak. But we never expected, she hitched slightly. An alliance of Sanagakure and Otogakure ninja attacked the village. Officially, we only have confirmation that Otogakure took part in the attack, because every ninja we killed wore an Otogakure Hite 8. The ones we were about to capture committed suicide by ingesting poison hidden in false teeth. Sandaime-sama, she exhaled slowly. According to the two members of his personal guard that survived, he fought valiantly until the end, but the sound of splintering wood caught her attention. Naruto stared down at the ground in front of him. His hands clenched so tightly that the armrests of the chair were creaking and beginning to splinter. Stupid, stupid old man? Why, he screamed to himself, do I have to lose my family like this? Slowly, he forced every muscle in his body to uncoil itself. It was the most he could do. After a few minutes wherein he exercised his mental control, he finally nodded. Yugo swallowed, and continued. Ever since then, well, we haven't been in very good shape. Our information now largely comes from travelers, because we need to keep most of our operations close to home. We've had no luck finding a new Hokage. Naruto managed to overcome the remaining inhibition. He would have to grieve for the old man when the time came. Right now, it seemed, there was far more that he needed to know, and if there was anything that his Sumeragi instructors had taught him, it was that information was among the most valuable coin anyone could have. Being aware of a situation gave him avenues to move down. Naruto liked having choices. Really? I mean, there has to be someone who wants to position. Well, you're right. Danzo wants the job. She saw him shudder, and nodded. Exactly. That's why the counselors are currently trying to deadlock the decision. In the interim, they've established an Anbu triumvirate to lead Konoha. And, much to my distress, she smiled weakly, I'm one of them. Hey, Naruto, you wanted to be Hokage, right? Want the job? His blank look worried her. No. So she tried to lighten it up. I was just joking, Naruto-kun. And failed. I wasn't. She looked at him strangely, and he knew why. He remembered, fuzzily, that he had once cherished and coveted that title. In the intervening time with the Sumeragi, however, he had lost track of it. And now that the old man wasn't going to be able to pass the title on personally, he shook his head. I have no interest in it. Those words felt so foreign to him, he hardly realized he was saying them, but it rang true. That ambition had been misplaced somewhere. He felt a bit hollower for it. Well, she felt sufficiently awkward, enough to attempt to redirect the conversation in a more friendly direction. We'll need to see about getting you into an academy class and… Naruto shook his head, and Yugo blinked. What? Well, not to sound arrogant, but I'm probably a bit beyond academy. She thought back to the rather impressive display with the Sakura, and nodded thoughtfully. You're probably right, so here's what we'll do. We have a class that's graduating in a week. I'm going to assign you to the class just to give you a refresher on what is required of you as a ninja. Following that, I'll organize a special group to analyze your skills, and we'll see where to go from there. Fair enough? Naruto thought about it for a moment, and then shrugged half-heartedly. It couldn't hurt, at least. Glad you're being cooperative. She smiled thinly. If you're interested, class starts in about 10 minutes. I'll send a messenger ahead to let Iruka know you're coming. Understood. He finally managed to stand himself up, wearily. He turned and made to leave, when he felt Yugo hug him from behind. She rested her chin on his head, and for the first time since he had returned to Konoha, he felt like he was home. It's good to have you back, Naruto-kun. Yeah, I'm happy to see you, Yugo Nichan. She released him after a time, and he walked out of the room. After calling in a messenger and dispatching him, she sat down and looked at the paperwork. They needed a new Hokage. That was not Danzo, and they needed one fast. This was killing her ability to spend time helping Hayate recover. With a frustrated sigh, she began to delve into the pile. Naruto looked up at the academy. It brought back a few awkward memories, but it held no real stigma, not anymore. A few last-minute arrivals dodged around him, and he saw faces that tugged at his memory, but nothing was more conclusive than errant thoughts like, oh, she looks familiar, or, I remember not liking that guy. So he shook his head and walked in. After asking where the proper class was, he found himself entering a room to a rather rambunctious lot. However, most chatter stopped cold when they spotted the new arrival. While exotic clothing was no stranger in Konoha, and especially to this class, and the boys was on the more conservative end of such dress, he still struck an odd figure with his blue-orange-black getup. He shifted a bit uncomfortably under the collective curious looks of the class, until at last someone, a boy with a loud voice and a white dog sitting on his desk space, called out to him. Hey, who are you? I'm Sakurazuka Naruto. He responded, nodding his head at the boy. That generated some buzz amongst the class. Was there a boy named Sakurazuka Naruto in their village? Why was he just now joining the academy if they were going to graduate in a week? However, after half a minute of it, a thud and exclamation of shock caught the attention of everyone in the room. Naruto blinked, tracing the source to a pink-haired girl who pointed at him. You're Uzumaki Naruto, the loud-mouthed kid that everybody ignored. Of course, as soon as she pointed that out, she realized how awkward it sounded. The rest of the class did as well, but soon there was more universal agreement as people began to recognize him from times past. Naruto sighed in frustration. How many times was he going to have to correct this? No, I'm not Uzumaki Naruto. A long time ago, maybe I was. But my clan is Sakurazuka, not Uzumaki. You can't just change your clan like that. Someone cried out. I did. No way. Someone else called out. It's true. Why'd you do it? The dog boy asked. Well, because I kinda had to. It's my job to continue this line, and the name is important and all. It's hard to explain. He frowned to himself. So why are you just now coming in? Another girl, this one blonde, spoke up. I mean, we're only a week from graduation, there's no way you'll be able to catch up. Ah, hey, well, I'm getting my evaluation in a little while, but chances are I won't need the academy. As for why I just came in, well, I've been getting my training and instruction at a special place. That got some ooze. Special places for training? It was the kind of intricate plot that fueled childhood imaginations. What did you train in? the pink-haired girl asked. Well, Naruto frowned. He was not sure whether or not revealing the subjects he had learned would be a good thing, since the Reverend Mother had always warned him that arrogance and showmanship led to weakness and death. Still, he figured, there was no real risk here. I learned Hakkyokuken and Onmyojutsu. Blank stares met him. I don't know how to explain any better than that. But then something hit him. Maybe a demonstration will work better. He fished out the same sakura petal he had held earlier and focused. In his mind, hundreds filled the room, flowing around through a gentle breeze, running amidst the students carelessly, and as soon as he knew that it was so, the illusion came to life. Most of the students gasped in awe as the cherry blossom petals danced through the air, some reaching out to grasp at them and coming up empty. There were delighted noises until someone cleared their throat and spoke very clearly. What is going on here? Amino Iruka demanded. Naruto's concentration shattered and the sakura faded away, and the boy turned around to look up at the man. Nothing, sir. Nothing, sir. Cute. He glared down at the child. Sakurazuka Naruto, I presume. Yes, I received the notification. I don't like it, but there's nothing I can do. Take the seat next to Yamanaka Ino. At this, the blonde girl waved a bit, and Naruto made his way a bit hesitantly. He could feel a pair of eyes on him as he moved that confused him. He traced their gaze, and found two blank white eyes staring at him. They reminded him of the man from earlier, right down to the curious and silent appraisal of him. He shuddered uncomfortably under the gaze, but nodded almost imperceptibly in acknowledgement, receiving one in return. He managed a gentle smile for Ino, before sitting down and paying attention to Iruka. That lasted all of 10 minutes. It wasn't so much that Iruka was boring, it was mostly that he was talking about things that Naruto had no idea about. It was easy to imagine that this was simply a refresher course for most of the kids, but Naruto was so far lost that after the 10 minutes he tried, he decided to turn his attention to other things. He fished for some paper and began to scribble on it furiously. Then he slid it to Ino. Who's the girl with the white eyes? Ino frowned at the paper and glanced sideways at him. Iruka was currently discussing missile trajectory calculation, and Ino, for all of her ability to grasp new jutsu and incredible chakra control, had no head for physics. So she shrugged and scribbled underneath his question, before sliding the paper back to him. Hyuga Hinata. Now that you mention her, she's been looking over this way a lot. No, why? Naruto shook his head. Hyuga was a name that sounded familiar, but it wasn't something he could pin. He couldn't remember anything to do with them, so he had no idea why. He took the paper and flipped it over, began to doodle to pass the time. After 3 hours or so, class finally dismissed until the afternoon session. Naruto was among the first out. Thank God, Naruto thought, finally that's over. Oh, no way. Ichiraku's is still here. Naruto cried jubilantly, dancing his way through the crowded street. Indeed, the ramen shop seemed to have survived unscathed, a miraculous feat considering the damage dealt to the places on either side of it. Naruto decided it was a blessing from the ramen gods. Yes, the one concrete memory Naruto retained of Konohagakure no Sato was the location and quality of Ichiraku ramen. He ducked into the store and took a seat right at the bar. I'll have one of everything. The man, Tucci, if Naruto recalled correctly, looked up in surprise. And then squinted his eyes at the boy. Say, you look familiar. What's your name, son? Sakurazuka Naruto. Tucci frowned at him. The name didn't fit the face. Well, the family name didn't. He knew that face, and he remembered the rambunctious child that ate there daily. Hey, I'll be damned. The man grinned slyly. My best customer finally returns. Ayame-chan, one of everything. Naruto heard another familiar voice, and sure enough, Ayame popped her head out to catch a glimpse of what party had arrived to order so much. When she saw the blonde, she stared at him long enough to recognize him, then literally dropped everything she was carrying and bull rushed him. Naruto hardly knew what hit him as the hostess slammed into him. What he could tell was that if she didn't let go soon, he was going to faint from oxygen deprivation, or from intense pain as his bones snapped. He managed to get out a muffled, "Hi to you too," into her shoulder before she released him from her iron grip. He looked up at her, and for the first time, though definitely not the last time, he began to genuinely regret leaving Konoha. She was crying, genuinely crying, and then she was hugging him again. And he realized that, As much as he had enjoyed staying with people that didn't ignore him at the Sumeragi compound, there were people here that he had left behind without a thought. He reached up and gently hugged her back. I missed you too. She finally withdrew and smiled shakily, wiping tears from her eyes. I'll get right on your order, Naruto-kun. Don't go anywhere. He nodded and she retreated, rolling up her sleeves. She was worried sick about you when you stopped showing up. Tucci finally spoke, intently cleaning dishes. We both were. We know that this city isn't exactly polite at times. So we couldn't help but think, but now here you are. He shook his head. It was kind of dull after you left. Most of our customers aren't very exciting. Naruto smiled weakly. Well, I had somewhere else to be for a long time. The older man smirked. Doing something productive, I imagine. You don't look as scrawny as you used to. Hey, Naruto scowled, before laughing. Yeah, I guess I was kinda small. Meet Suomi-sensei said, when I first started training with him, that we needed to take it slow because of my body, but after a year or so I was able to go all out. Well, eating ramen daily, while we appreciate your business and presence, is hardly healthy for a growing body. Tucci laughed. It's good that your teacher caught that. I've seen a lot of ninja broken because they tried for too much, too fast. At the questioning look, the man gazed up at the ceiling thoughtfully. Sometimes, after being injured, a ninja will go back to training too soon. Some are fine, but others lose everything. If your body isn't up for what you're trying to do, forcing it to do it anyways can lead to disaster. Know your limits. Naruto nodded thoughtfully, and then their conversation was interrupted by Ayame, who brought the first bowl out and set it down in front of him. Rather boisterously, the blonde child exclaimed, "Itadakimasu," and began to dig into the ramen. Yamanaka-san, do you have a moment? Ino's head snapped up, and she turned to look at the person who had called her. The Hyuga heiress, one Hyuga Hinata, waved at her, and while Ino was slightly unhappy at being distracted from lunch, eating alone had never been a hobby of hers. So she waved Hinata over, and the elegant girl approached, taking her seat across from the blonde. Hinata opened her bento and took a few brief bites before setting it aside and giving Ino a look that the girl had only witnessed a few times before. This look was often followed by intense physical pain as she mercilessly beat the crap out of her opponent. Ino, understandably, blanched at the look. Nobody had known how or why, but some time ago the shy girl had transformed into the gentle but somewhat stubborn, outgoing kunoichi that Hyuga Hinata was today. Hinata smiled and waved it away. Not to worry, Yamanaka-san, no sparring today. I wanted to ask you if you had any idea where Sakurazuka-san went for lunch? Ino let out a silent sigh of relief. Please, Hinata-chan, no need to be so formal. It was a constant struggle to remind her to remain on a first-name basis, if only because of the mannerisms demanded of her, but one that Ino always had time for. Formality, to her, represented a waste of energy that could be spent getting somewhere. No, I don't know where Naruto-kun went for lunch, but he said something about ramen. I see. Hinata smiled, and then repacked her bento and made to stand up, when Ino's curiosity finally got the better of her. Why do you want to know? Hinata paused, looking thoughtful. I am curious about the circumstances of his return. Would you like to join me? Well, all right, sure. I am a little curious too. Ino packed her lunch away as well, and then rose. Any idea where the ramen places are around here? There are a few, but if I remember him at all, I think I know where to find him. Then lead the way. Ino smiled. It was always fun to explore the town. Naruto was so focused on the ramen in front of him that he failed to notice when the two kunoichi sat down on either side of him. As such, he had no way of knowing what was about to happen to him, and happily went for another mouthful of noodles. I thought you were dead. Naruto somehow managed to spit out the broth but inhaled the noodles, thumping on his chest and coughing severely as his throat worked to force them down into his gullet. Ino and Hinata sat bashfully as most of the crowd at Ichiraku Ramen stared at the spectacle, until Naruto finally managed to breathe again. He turned to Hinata with an incredulous look. Is that how you always start conversations? Ino had to admit, Hinata's choice of opening was more than a little unorthodox, especially for someone normally so insistent on tradition, but now that it had been said, she was even more curious, since they seemed to have some history. Finally regaining some measure of composure, Hinata smiled. My apologies, Sakurazuka-sa. Naruto. He interrupted. Naruto-san, I didn't mean to startle you, but you gave me something of a scare when you showed up. I thought you were dead. After a moment in which Naruto devoured the remains of his third bowl of ramen, he set the bowl down and turned to look at her inquisitively. Why did you think I was dead? Hinata glanced at the bar, showing the first sign of demureness Ino had seen in a while from her. When we were young, everyone would always ignore you. But no matter how much they ignored you or discouraged you, you would always try your best. In this city, to me, you are the only thing of note. Naruto flushed slightly but said nothing, keeping his eyes on Hinata's, which were now looking back at him directly. I admired who you were. I wanted to be like you. When you disappeared, at first I thought you had maybe just given up, and I thought I would still see you around, just not like before. When you never showed up after months, and then years, I thought you were dead. Ino leaned over. Yeah, I remember wondering where the obnoxious, loud-mouthed idiot had gone. But after a while, I kinda forgot about you. At Hinata's slightly horrified look and Naruto's irritated glare, she shrugged helplessly. I was young and you were annoying. The sooner I could get rid of irritations, the better. Then she paled. Oh no, I sound like Shikamaru. At that, Hinata had to stifle a giggle, while Naruto, still a bit insulted and confused at the reference, mumbled something and poked around at the fourth bowl. In any case, Naruto ground out, is there any reason that you had to bring it up? You know I'm not dead, so… Hinata looked stricken, and Ino was beginning to understand why. The heiress looked at Naruto. When I realized that you were gone, I had to change myself. I picked up the torch I thought you had dropped. I became who I am today because I thought that you were dead. Forgive me for this sounding a little awkward, but I built myself around the notion that you had died. So you wish I was dead? He responded. No, she cried emphatically. Never. But, well, you're here. And if I can't be who I was, then who do I have to become now? Naruto exhaled slowly. Look, you can stay who you are. I'm not who I was 5 years ago. And you aren't who you were 5 years ago. Can't we just say we've grown up a bit and let it go at that? Hinata frowned. The boy she had once measured herself against had finally returned, but now he was on some other kind of scale, or a different unit of measurement entirely. What would it take to catch up with him? No, we can't. Are we going to have to fight? The boy asked. He sounded less than enthusiastic. Not unless you want to. Hinata said quietly. But I can't just let this go. Naruto-san, I need to know how far I've come. So what do you have in mind? I don't know, but when I find something, I'll let you know. She smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry to have burdened you with this on your first day back. Naruto waved her concern away. It's been a long day for me, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Don't worry about it, but, look, let me explain it this way. If I can help you in any way, I will. I've always been like that, and I probably always will be. But I don't help people who refuse to help themselves. You decided you wanted to change, and I am kind of flattered that you chose me of all people to model yourself after, but you are your own person. I'll help you find out who you are. Naruto-kun, Ino breathed. She was more than a little surprised at the blonde, and how he was handling the situation. In any event, I'm still hungry. If you two don't mind, I'd like to finish my lunch before class starts again. Well, Ino thought as Hinata blinked at his rather sudden dismissal of their conversation. At least he doesn't fool around. Konoha slept peacefully into the morning. The early risers awoke and set about their daily business, careful not to rouse those who did not share their sleeping schedule. At 7 in the morning, most of Konoha woke up. Not because they of them wanted to, oh no. That house that had remained silent for 5 years, that had once been the lair of the demon child, suddenly sang. A swing guitar riff, followed by brass staccato, erupted from the house with such fury that the windows shuddered, and the neighbors shot upright in bed. Slowly, Naruto stirred as the music played on, reaching over and fumbling with his nightstand. When his hand met nothing, he scowled, then sat upright and glared at the record player, the song now in full gear as brass truly joined in the swing. Swinging his legs out of bed, he stumbled over to the record player and switched it off. Wearily he looked back at the bed, and then sighed and trudged over to his bathroom to shower and begin the day. He had just gotten out of the shower when he first heard the knocks on his door. Naruto ignored it for a moment, going to dress himself when the knocks increased in force and frequency. Now worried that his door was about to be broken down, he knotted the towel at his side and walked to the door, then opened it. Several unhappy and sleepy villagers saw the 12-year-old blonde standing half-naked in the doorway with an irritated expression on his face and immediately blanked. Half with fear, half with curiosity. Here was a specimen most of them had either forgotten or believed dead, with varying degrees of glee. To see him suddenly returned was startling to say the least. The crowd shifted aside as one determined individual made their way forward, and Naruto blinked in surprise when Ino parted the sea of people, rage on her face. She finally made it to the front, her mouth opened and ready to yell at whoever had interrupted her sleep when she saw Naruto as well. "Ino-san? Naruto-kun? That was your racket? Yeah, sorry." Thwack. Her fist met his skull and he winced. The crowd sighed and began to depart, though many hung back in small groups to discuss the return of the Kyuubi vessel, occasionally throwing dark glances at the house. Naruto stood there as Ino ranted about how she needed her sleep and that it was incredibly rude to interrupt that time for her, before he finally managed to interrupt. "Ino-san, can I get dressed before you continue? The knot is starting to come loose." Finally the blonde girl managed to process the fact that she was yelling at a freshly showered, towel-wearing boy and her face flushed a magnificent red. Yeah, come on in, it'll only take me a moment." He gestured, and hesitantly she stepped into his house and shut the door. Her head was full of odd fantasies. This was just like those trashy stories that she stole from her mom to read. He was mostly naked and inviting her into his house. Soon he would take her on the bed or in the kitchen or any number of places and… "Ino-san?" Earth to Ino-san. Her gaze refocused to find Naruto, now properly dressed, waving his hand in front of her face. Ino jumped back, and shook her head to clear it of the remaining cobwebs from her fantasies. She looked over him, at the white silk shirt and khaki pants he wore, and quirked a brow. "You know how to dress yourself decently. Are you gay?" Naruto facepalmed. "No, I just like to look nice. Clothes don't make the man, but they certainly don't hurt him." She turned from him and immediately realized that despite his semi-groomed appearance, he was beyond messy. "Did you not clean up before you left?" The boy turned and faced the room, with scattered scrolls and empty, broth-stained bowls, and a number of ofuda he had yet to finish inscribing littered about. "They cleaned my house sometime after I left." "Then this is all from yesterday?" She paled when she saw Naruto nod. "How can you live like this? This is beyond messy. This is a nightmare." Hurricane Naruto. The child coughed, more than a little embarrassed, but said nothing as she began to filter through things. "Scroll, bowl, scroll. One don't even want to know what this is, and, hey, what are these things anyways?" She held up the paper strip with a half-completed pentagram. Taking it from her, Naruto smiled at it fondly, and then traced the star with his index finger, completing the pentagram on it. Holding it up, he grinned. "This is my ability. Onmyojutsu. These pieces of paper are ofuda. Oh, so kinda like tags. Do they explode?" She tilted her head. "They can, but they can also do a lot of things. For instance," he turned his head so that the ofuda lay resting on his palm, faced up toward the ceiling. He willed it, and the paper warped, bent, and suddenly animated. A black raven formed, and rested in Naruto's hand, looking at Ino, who squealed. "Is that a summoned beast? You must be amazing to have one already." "Not quite. I don't know how summoning contracts really work, but these are my own creation. They're shikigami, paper servants whose existence is bound to me." He dismissed the raven, the shikigami distorting itself back into the original ofuda, which Naruto snagged and placed in his sleeve. "So they're not real summons?" Ino pouted. "And here I thought you were cool." "Hey," Naruto protested, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'll have you know I am awesome. HMPH, whatever." She sniffed imperiously and returned to rummaging through the mess that was Naruto's living room. "So you said that they're not summons, they're shikigami. And you use, what was it, onmyojutsu? So what does that fall under? Ninjutsu? Genjutsu? I mean, the Sakura thing you showed yesterday had to be an illusion, right?" Naruto nodded. "It's an illusion, but I don't really know if what I do falls under ninjutsu or genjutsu." Ino paused in her work, turning to give him an odd look. "What do you mean by that?" He frowned, placing a fist under his chin. "It's hard to explain. The closest I've come to being able to analyze the differences is that my onmyojutsu requires a different power source than chakra." He hummed thoughtfully. "I imagine that with the difference in power source there might be other complications, but for all of my combat practice, I've only ever fought another onmyoji." I have no idea how it works on anyone else. So you're cheating, basically. He paused. Huh? Well, you're using something completely different. Bloodline limits and clan abilities are sometimes considered unfair abilities, but they still follow the same rules that most of our techniques do. You work on a completely different system. Ergo, you're cheating. I never really thought about it that way. She feed to herself. Of course not. I don't like it, not one bit. Naruto shook his head. Well, sorry, but it's kind of something that I was trained in. If you really expect me to not use it, you're crazy. I figured, she said sourly. I just don't like it. But we're ninja, and we have to use everything at our disposal to win. Naruto nodded, then glanced at the clock. It'd be another 2 hours before class started. So, Ino-san, since we have time, would you, help me tidy up a bit? The blonde girl glared at him. Do I look like your maid? Eep. Naruto gulped. No? Good. She nodded. But because you asked, I'll help you. But just this once. Smiling with relief, Naruto joined her in milling through the objects that littered his living room, eager to get to know this girl who was very quickly becoming his first real friend in Konohagakure. The week passed fairly quickly outside of class, but inside time seemed to slow to a crawl. Even though almost all of the lessons were last-minute refresher courses, they were mostly over things that Naruto had no clue about, with the exception of most of the history lessons. Naruto had, during his stay with the Sumeragi, stumbled upon a few volumes of classical texts and history books and, eager as he had been for things to do at all times of the day with his Kage Bunshin, read them all inside a week. The end result was that he knew a lot of the history of the elemental countries, and a good bit of contextual history, though his understanding was occasionally flawed because of an inability to really grasp what some of the more complicated prose was saying. He had surprised the class by occasionally raising his hand during the lectures to ask for clarification here or mention a conflicting point of view there, prompting a brief discourse on Iruka's part to explain the differences. Ino had asked him about it one day after class. You seem to know a lot of this stuff. Why do you ever research boring stuff like that? Naruto hummed thoughtfully. Well, at the time I never really gave much thought to why I needed to know about it. It just sounded interesting. I may never need the information, but then, maybe I will, and that could be the difference between life and death someday. You think a history question will save you from getting killed? Ino deadpanned. Well, you never know. He shrugged. Naruto-kun, you are weird. He had laughed, and then they had gone their separate ways. Now, though, the class was silent and the tension was palpable. The test results were going to be announced, and individual team assignments were being handed out and the teams were meeting with their Junin-sensei. Even Inuzuka Kiba, who Naruto had quickly learned was the loudmouth of the class, was quiet, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The clock ticked 9:30 and the door opened shortly thereafter, and Iruka entered the room. Dead silence met him, and he smiled softly. I know that this is a tough day. But everyone here has graduated. A lot of relieved sighs met this announcement. So that means that now, I will break you all into your genin teams, and tell you who your instructors will be. And so he began to call out names, and the groups gravitated toward each other. When Ino's team was announced as the second generation of the legendary team-up, Ino exhaled visibly, and Naruto smiled encouragingly. Team 7 will consist of Uchiha Sasuke, Inuzuka Kiba, and Haruno Sakura. Yes, the exultant pink-haired girl cheered, punching the air. Beat that, Yamanaka. Ino rolled her eyes, and Naruto resolved to ask her about that later. He decided to finally pay a bit of attention. Kiba he already knew, having found a small measure of kinship in the animalistic boy. But the other two he had never really bothered getting close to. He had been instructed by Yugo that he would observe Team 7 until it was time for his assessment, which was determined to be that evening. He looked Sakura over, then Sasuke, and shrugged mentally. They seemed fairly balanced. He knew that Kiba's grades were bottom barrel, just barely scraping the minimum needed to graduate, whereas Sasuke and Sakura were supposed to both be exemplary students in varying ways. He'd find out sooner or later. So the list continued, and when that was done, several Junin filed in to take their teams away. Naruto waved a goodbye to Ino as she left with Choji and Shikamaru, leaning back on the hind legs of his chair, arms behind his back, whistling. 2 hours passed before the stalemate between the 4 remaining students was broken. So, Naruto, Sakura started, why are you staying here? He stopped whistling and turned his head to look at her. I was assigned by the head of the council to stay with Team 7 for the day until my assessment. Assessment? She frowned. Yeah, since I don't know a lot about ninjutsu and genjutsu and all of this stuff, but I know alternatives, they want to see where I belong. So I'm really just here to kill time. TCH. Like you could really do much of anything. That was, truthfully, the first time Naruto heard the Uchiha prodigy say anything. If you don't know the fundamentals of ninjutsu and genjutsu, you can't be a good ninja. Well, I suppose that's probably true, in the strictest sense of the word ninja. Naruto conceded. But I don't fit that frame of reference, so using the strict sense of a ninja is probably a bad idea in my case. HMPH. The Uchiha stared at him for a minute and then rolled his eyes and looked away. Naruto sighed in exasperation and glanced at the clock. Whoever your Junin is, he kind of fails at time. As though those were summoning words, the door to the classroom opened. A man with gray-white hair and one visible eye stepped inside, and swept the nigh-empty classroom. Finding the place still filled with 4 students rather than 3, he frowned, though it was hidden by the cloth that covered the lower half of his face. My first thought is, there's one too many of you. Those who are supposed to be my students, meet me on the roof in 5 minutes. He walked out, and Naruto quirked a brow. He's this late and that's all he has to say for himself? Interesting guy. I'll kick his ass. Shanaru. Pause. Everyone in the room turned to stare at Sakura, who seemed to wither under the collective gaze. Okay, I do believe I said that only my students are supposed to be up here. The man said. Sakura and Kiba looked at Naruto, who shrugged. Yugo Ni-chan said that I'm attached to Team 7 for the day, so here I am. Ah. The Junin catalogued the fact that the boy referred to the unofficial head of the Junin tribunal as his sister. There was no possible way they were related, but it was something to make note of regardless. Well, in that case, we'll start with introductions. I'll go first, to show you how it's done. My name is Hitaki Kakashi. My likes, dislikes, and dreams are personal. Now, you. He nodded at Sakura, who stared at him. That didn't tell us anything. She protested weakly, and was met with a loose shrug from Kakashi. Sighing, she began. My name is Haruno Sakura. My likes, well, here, she glanced at Sasuke, who didn't seem to notice. My dislikes are anyone who refers to my forehead as big and perverts. My dreams are, again, a furtive look at Sasuke, accompanied by a faint blush. Naruto sighed. God, could these people be any more vague about themselves? Kakashi turned on him, and Naruto got the distinct impression that he was grinning under that mask. Well, then, boy, it's your turn. He hesitated and then shrugged. Sure, my name is Sakurazuka Naruto, formerly Uzumaki Naruto. He didn't seem to notice Kakashi's slight reaction to the name. My likes are ramen, onmyo, and all of the sumeragi. My dislike is the shade who lives in me, because he seriously weirds me out sometimes. My dream is to become the strongest onmyoji in the world and then work toward unity. Unity? Kakashi blinked. What do you mean? Hard to explain in words. Hey, you want to be vague with your introduction, I'll be vague with mine. The Junin turned towards Sasuke. Your turn, happy boy. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. My likes and dislikes are inconsequential. My dream is to kill a certain man. The black-haired boy stated bluntly. Naruto quirked a brow. If you actually knew what it was like to kill, I don't think you'd be so eager. But then, maybe I'm wrong. And lastly, Kakashi turned to Kiba, who flashed a toothy grin. The name is Inuzuka Kiba. My likes are Akamaru, trees, and clean-smelling women. My dislikes are people who don't bathe and girls who wear too much clothing. My dream is to become the strongest ninja in Konoha, of course. Well, 1 out of 4 sane people isn't too bad. Kakashi rationalized. Well then, allow me to inform you of the procedures of the day. How long has it been since any of you ate? The answers were mixed, but 5 hours seemed most common. All right, good. You should have digested most of your food by now. In 2 hours' time, I want all of you to meet me on Training Field 10 for your Genin test. Wait, Sasuke frowned. We already took our Genin test. Kakashi shook his head. No, you took a test that allowed you to graduate from the academy. You are not a Genin until you pass the test your Junin sensei gives you. He smirked. Don't eat anything between now and then unless you want to lose it. He made to stand up and leave, before Naruto cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but should we expect you to be on time to the training ground?" Kakashi blinked. "You should show up on time regardless of when I actually happen to show up." Hell of a double standard. "But I'm asking primarily so I can decide if it's worth my time to show up or if I shouldn't just wait until my appraisal before heading out." The Junin had to restrain a chuckle. The boy spoke delightfully bluntly. "Be there. Gotcha." The Junin seemed to disappear from the rooftop, leaving the 4 children there. Stretching a bit, Naruto stood up. "Well then, I suppose I'll see you all in 2 hours. "Hold on," Sakura started. "You can't just talk to someone like that, especially a Junin. Are you crazy? I don't give anyone respect unless they prove that they're worth it. He's already decided that we're not worth his time, so why should I give him that satisfaction? Besides," and here he smirked, "he's not my teacher. Why should I care?" Sakura frowned, but could not find a way to combat that logic beyond the normal, kids should respect their elders response. But, as he had said earlier, normal hardly seemed to apply to him. "So yeah, 2 hours. Naruto waved to the 3, receiving 2 waves in return, before heading down the stairs. "He's such a fool," Sasuke finally said, turning to glower at the door Naruto had just left through. "I don't give anyone respect unless they prove they're worth it. The man is a Junin. He's strong enough to kill. That alone proves him worthy of respect. What other measure can you take except one of strength? The strongest one gets the most respect, and that Junin is certainly stronger than him." Kiba snorted. He knew the might makes right mentality. He loved proving that he was the stronger of the two in any fight, but he also knew from the few times he'd seen his mother dealing with clan and village affairs that strength came in various types, and physical strength would ultimately mean little in the long run. When Sasuke turned his glare on him, he bared his teeth. "Don't mind me, pretty boy. I don't care about the opinions of a dead last. You wanna fight? Well, so much for the sophistry." 2 hours later, Team 7 and Naruto were assembled on the field. Sakura paced, and Naruto grumbled alongside his stomach about a lack of food. Kiba spoke in low tones with Akamaru, a subject that had fascinated Naruto to the point where he'd once asked Kiba if he could really understand Akamaru. "Kinda," the Inuzuka had replied. "It's more like my mind can translate what Akamaru says into pictures, and from that I can understand what he's saying. Mom, though, can understand everything. She says that eventually I'll get to be the same way. That's a really cool power. Does it only work with dogs?" Naruto asked around a mouthful of noodles. "Yeah, Mom said that sometimes she can get glimpses from other animals, and she uses it on missions every now and then, and she says it saved her life, but she doesn't rely on it at all." Now, Naruto wondered what they were talking about, but chose not to interrupt. Kiba tended to be very private with Akamaru, from what the Sakurazuka had gathered in his brief week back in Konoha. "Everyone is here, good." Naruto blinked in surprise. He checked his watch. It was only 5 minutes after the designated meeting time. Turning, he saw the Junin, Hitaki Kakashi, standing languorously beside a tree. "Very well, if everyone is ready, I will explain the test. Your job is to take these bells, holding up 2 shiny, silver bells, from me through any means possible. You have 3 hours to do so. Those who have a bell after those 3 hours will pass the test." Naruto paused, frowning. Something wasn't adding up here. 2 bells, 3 genin, that meant. Sakura voiced his curiosity. "Kakashi-sensei, if there are only 2 bells but 3 of us, then that means that one of us will fail." "That's right," Kakashi said cheerfully. "One of you is going to fail. Now, when I give the word, you will have 3 hours to claim these bells. And I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, but you have to sit this one out." The blonde, who had looked rather excited at the prospect of getting involved in the tussle, deflated, his shoulders sagging. Yeah, not a part of the team and all that. You can have front row seats." The Junin promised solemnly. Naruto perked up a bit at that. A close-up view of carnage and mayhem, all yours for the low price of nothing. "Interested? Carnage, you promised." Kakashi's smirk carried into his eyes. "On my honor, Naruto-kun." It was carnage, all right, Naruto decided. The Junin had added insult to injury by pulling out a book. Naruto recognized the distinctive orange cover of an Icha volume, and beginning to read while his genin made ready. The first hour was relatively quiet as plans were laid out. Or rather, Naruto had assumed that plans were being laid out. In hindsight, he wondered if anyone had stopped to think that 3 versus 1 might actually work better than what they attempted to do. He had known for a fact that Kiba was going to go head-on for Kakashi. It was what the kid was best at. Subterfuge was not one of his stronger points. To his credit, he did force Kakashi to look away from his book once before delivering the promised carnage. A lightning-fast uppercut to the tip of his jaw and Kiba lost all control of his body. He was still having trouble moving by himself at the moment. Sasuke had shown the skill that everyone said he had, including use of a few fire jutsu that looked fairly impressive but were overall pointless against Kakashi's skill. Naruto thought that a lot of his taijutsu was wasted motion, though, and figured that in a hand-to-hand fight he would probably come out on top. Sakura, Naruto shook his head. Her performance had been relatively abysmal. One technique, some kind of illusionary ability, Genjutsu, Naruto mentally corrected himself, and she was out of the fight entirely. He imagined that if she could get over whatever that was about, she probably would perform decently. Still, the 3-hour mark passed and the sun was beginning to set. He checked his watch. Only another hour and a half until his appraisal was scheduled to take place. You all, as you should realize by now, have failed. Horribly. Kakashi stated bluntly. Not one of you came near to capturing a bell. However, I am generous. I'm feeling rather hungry. Since you, Pinky, performed the worst, I am forbidding you to partake in any food. He produced 3 bentos from a storage scroll, and handed one to Kiba, Sasuke, and Naruto. If I find out that any one of you has shared food with her, you will all be failed. Naruto blinked. That sounds unnecessarily cruel. Ah well. He opened the bento and took a few bites, as did the others, Sakura's growling stomach composing an awkward tune to fill the silence. You know, you guys probably could have taken him if you'd gone at him together instead of one at a time. He said at last, breaking the silence. He's a Junin, moron. There's no way that 3 of us could distract him for more than a few seconds. Sasuke retorted. What if a few seconds is all you needed? It's not like the job was to take him down. Distract him long enough for someone to sneak in and grab the bells. There were only 2 though. Sakura cut in. Even if that worked, only 2 of us at most would get the promotion. Naruto frowned. That did complicate matters. The only alternative he could think of was an answer that was so amazingly obvious that it seemed like it wouldn't require iterating. But given the personalities of this group, perhaps it was just the lesson they needed. Shrugging at last, he decided to play a little game. Still though, you guys sucked. Nobody could handle him for more than a few seconds at most. Like you could have done better, idiot. Naruto turned to stare levelly at Sasuke. In all honesty, I probably could, the first time at least. The Uchiha snorted. Prove it. Naruto smiled mercilessly, and a hint of unease flickered over the Uchiha's face at such a predatory look. If he'll let me, sure. Kiba shook his head. You don't stand a chance, Naruto. The guy moves too fast to follow, at least as we are now. That's why I'll keep him from moving. Naruto said. How? Kiba responded. I just will. I know that I will, and as such, it will happen. Sakura gaped at him, at such arrogance, but a small part of her that remembered his trick on the first day of class wondered whether it was an unfounded arrogance. Her stomach continued to growl until, at last, Sasuke sighed. All right, fine. I'll give you some of mine. She opened her mouth to protest, and he shook his head. He's not around to see, and you'll do no good to us if you're weak from hunger by the time he gets back. So eat. Flushing slightly, she opened her mouth to accept the food when Kakashi reappeared. I thought, his voice was dangerously low, that I said nobody was to feed her. Sasuke grunted. She'd have gotten in the way if she was weak, and we need her to be strong. Is that so? Kakashi rounded on Kiba, who nodded hesitantly. Very well then. You all, pass. Blink blink. Naruto smiled as the realization dawned on them. Sakura was the first to react vocally. Then, all of this was about teamwork? Yes. I can see that if you took the time to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses you'd form a very formidable team. But if every one of you is running off on his own, then you're going to get yourself killed or your teammates killed. A ninja who breaks the rules, they say, is scum. Kakashi leaned in. But people who abandon their friends for the sake of a mission are lower than scum. This rock is carved with the names of heroes. But don't get too attached to the idea. These heroes all have one thing in common. They're all dead. It is your job to make certain that neither you nor any of your teammates wind up on this rock. Solemn silence filled the gap here, and he finally relaxed. Since Team 7 is now active, we will begin taking missions tomorrow. I expect everyone ready on time, ignoring the pointed looks sent his way, and prepared for whatever the tribunal gives us. Understood? The trio saluted sharply, and Kakashi nodded. Dismissed. Not just yet, sensei. Sasuke stated, turning to Naruto. You said that you could pass the belt test by yourself. Let's see it, right now. Kakashi turned his eye to Naruto, who shrugged. If you really want to see it, then sure. Assuming that's all right with you, Kakashi-sensei. I mean, this won't take more than a few seconds. The Junin didn't know whether to be amused or insulted by the insinuation and settled on indifferent. Well, as long as it doesn't take too long, I don't mind. Pulling out the book, he settled into his reading stance. Whenever you're ready. Naruto pulled an ofuda from the sleeve of his shirt and began to chant softly. The trees rustled, and Sakura swore that she glimpsed cherry blossoms between the branches. Even Kakashi looked up from his book momentarily. Sakurazukamori Genkaku Onmyo. Naruto cried, thrusting forward with the ofuda. Nei Hokaku Huhu. Suddenly, Kakashi was being forcibly restrained by a number of roots. He grimaced and pulled with all of his might, but could not budge them more than an inch. No matter how he struggled, he could do nothing as Naruto walked forward and plucked the two bells off of the Junin's belt. As soon as Naruto turned to walk away, Kakashi felt the bonds disappear and blinked. He had certainly rather underestimated the boy. The other three were speechless. Then Sasuke scowled and turned to walk away. After a moment's hesitation, so too did Sakura and Kiba. When they were gone, Naruto sighed and tossed the bells over his shoulder to Kakashi, who caught them handily. So, Naruto-kun, mind explaining that? Explaining what? How I managed to hold you perfectly still despite your best efforts to break free, despite being a novice and all of 12 years old. Something like that, yeah. Naruto sighed. Maybe you'll understand it easier than I did when I first learned the theory behind it. If you haven't guessed, I don't use ninjutsu. Well, I know Kage Bunshin, but that's the extent of it. I don't know Genjutsu, but I know Onmyojutsu. And Onmyojutsu is an external art, rather than an internal art like Genjutsu or ninjutsu. Meaning what, exactly? Well, most of the information I have on Genjutsu is a little sketchy, but you can help me. Genjutsu is all about creating a world that the target will believe, yes? You can't just make yourself disappear with Genjutsu because the target knows that you're right in front of him, but you can make yourself invisible if the target doesn't know you're supposed to be there. That kind of thing. It all relies on how your opponent perceives reality, yes? Kakashi nodded. In theory. In practice it works a little differently, but that's why you don't really see too many Genjutsu masters. Well, my Onmyojutsu illusions work differently. They work based on my perception of reality. So long as I believe something is a certain way, as long as my force of will overpowers yours, you believe it too. For instance, I could tell you that you weren't actually restrained by anything. But I convinced your mind that you were, in fact, bound. Kakashi blinked. Wait, then when I was using all of my strength to break free, I couldn't because your mind believed that no matter how hard you struggled, you would not break free, because that was the reality I imposed on you. Naruto shrugged. When I had it explained to me, the Reverend Mother said that it works because the mind makes it real. I imagine that had I been an actual enemy ninja and not, for instance, some brat in your eyes, it would not have worked as well because you would have needed to escape in order to survive, and your force of will would probably have overcome mine. It's not infallible by any means, but it's strong enough. Kakashi frowned, beginning to put pieces together. As a higher-up member of the Konoha military forces, he knew of the existence of the Sakurazukamori. All reports had indicated, though, that he was dead, found in an alleyway some 7 or 8 years ago. He didn't know how the line continued, but the clan name Sakurazuka, now that Kakashi thought about it, and the origin of the mystical powers associated with the Sakurazukamori were beginning to make sense when this boy presented everything. So then, you're the… No, Naruto interrupted. Not yet, at least. I'm too weak to take the mantle up properly. Plus, I don't like killing people. You'll make a pretty pathetic ninja if you're squeamish about killing people. The Junin commented. I don't like to do it. It doesn't mean I won't do it. It doesn't. Naruto's throat seized, but he forced his way past it. It doesn't mean I haven't done it before. Something in his tone gave away part of his secret to Kakashi, who put a hand on Naruto's head and ruffled his hair. So where are you supposed to be getting assessed, Naruto-kun? Here, actually. A feminine voice spoke up, and Kakashi turned to see Azuki Yugo, Gekko Hayate, and, surprisingly, Hyuga Hiyashi approaching. Well, Kakashi-san, I suppose you had to learn about Naruto sooner or later. The gray-haired Junin turned to face the impromptu leader. Could have warned me about his tricks a little earlier, Neko. Hey, I know as much as you do. She smiled disarmingly. That's mostly what tonight is about. We're here to assess Naruto's abilities in relation to what we do know, so that we can find out where he needs to be. Now, she turned to Naruto. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be, I guess. The blonde smiled. In retrospect, perhaps he wasn't as ready as he'd thought. While his Onmyo techniques had been demonstrated adequately, he had thought that his hand-to-hand proficiency test was going to be a fairly simple matter. Then the man from the council, Hyuga Hiyashi, had stepped forward and proceeded to beat Naruto senseless. He could remember getting 2 shots in, but neither seemed to do any real damage to the man who advanced. Naruto had always assumed he was fairly good on the defensive end of martial arts, but Hiyashi's attacks had seemed serpentine in the way that they danced around his blocks to strike him. By the time Yugo finally called the match to an end, Naruto was beginning to see the emerging pattern, but the man's adaptability was ridiculous. Well, Naruto, we're ready to give our verdict. Just a moment, the boy replied, still face down in the dirt and grass. He hurt a lot, he didn't really want to move. Slowly, though, he forced himself up, got both of his legs under him, and stood upright. Swaying a little, he approached the tribunal. Yugo motioned to the rock, and Naruto gratefully accepted the offer, collapsing on it. Well, we have come to an agreement. While you show talent in areas considered the equivalent of ninjutsu and genjutsu above the norm for a genin, and your taijutsu is remarkable for your age, we have decided that placing you in the rank of chunin at the moment would be imprudent. Naruto blinked, tilting his head. Why? Well, consider this. Even one of our most talented ninjas took a year to go from genin to chunin. Do you know why? Naruto thought about it for a moment. They organized all genin into teams. Certainly there was something to be said for others shoring up your own weaknesses, but if they acted at all times like Team 7 had earlier, then. So basically, I don't have the kind of teamwork experience required to obtain that rank. She smiled. Got it in one. We can't have people infighting during the kind of missions our chunin are liable to receive. So we need you to gain a little bit of experience in that field before you can be moved up the ranks. I see. And how are we going to do this? I don't really have a team. This is where Kakashi comes in. The copy nin looked up from his book upon hearing his name, and she grinned. Naruto will remain an attaché of the council to Team 7 for their upcoming mission. I hope your team is ready, Kakashi. We should be. What's the mission though? An escort. We'll be explaining the whole of it tomorrow, but you'll be escorting a bridge builder to aid in the completion of his project in a timely manner. The bridge is located in Nami no Kuni. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. You're giving an escort mission, and an escort mission into foreign territory, to a newly graduated class? That seems fairly risky. Yugo's smile evaporated and she sighed, finally showing some of the exhaustion of her position. We don't have much of a choice. This is a C-rank mission. Theoretically, you shouldn't be under much, if any, danger. But you need to understand, Kakashi, we need to get as many of our people abroad as we can right now without it looking like a mobilization. Why? Naruto asked from the side. We need someone new to step into the role of Hokage. The triumvirate, with some outside opinion, both Hayate and Hiyashi nodded solemnly, has determined a small list of candidates. But we don't know where some of them are, so we need everyone spread out while keeping most of Konoha's military at home. And time is running out, I assume. Kakashi frowned. Danzo putting on his normal song and dance for the council? Even more than usual. And it seems unless we actually get anyone else, we won't have a choice. And I don't think anyone here wants to envision a Konoha under Danzu's tender guidance. The group shuddered. So who are the candidates that we're supposed to keep an eye out for? Kakashi asked. You will be looking for anyone on the list, but keep an eye out for 2 specific individuals, since we've had tips that they were in that location. You're probably familiar with their names. Senju Tsunade and Jiraiya. Who? Naruto interrupted. The gray-haired Junin blinked. Really? Two of the Sanin in a backwoods place like Nami? Well, last report had that they were in Cha no Kuni moving north toward Nami. Apparently, Tsunade needs money to pay off her debts, and some people who owe her live there. Still the legendary sucker, eh? Kakashi chuckled. Kind of fitting that one of Sandame's students would take his position, especially after. Yugo glared at him sharply, and he stopped talking. Naruto had suddenly perked up, paying close attention to Kakashi. What? Especially after what? Nothing, Naruto-kun. Nothing. Yugo smiled, but Naruto could tell it was fake. He scowled, but didn't press the issue. Well then. Hiyashi nodded to Kakashi and the others. If everyone doesn't mind, I have a few matters I would like to discuss with Sakurazuka-san in private. Hesitant to leave, Yugo looked at the boy, who shrugged and nodded. Yeah, sure, why not? With a resigned sigh, she nodded. Please be on time for the assignment tomorrow, Naruto-kun. Understood. The boy never once looked away from Hiyashi, perhaps as though trying to discern something from the stone face that would give a hint of what was such an issue that he had to be called out specifically. When the three others finally left the clearing, Hiyashi nodded. Sakurazuka-san, would you please come with me? My family's compound is not far, and I am sure that you would not object to tea. Naruto wouldn't have objected anyways, but there seemed to be some hidden emphasis that hinted at a subtle threat if he disagreed. Looking up at the Hyuga clan head, he nodded. Fine, but only if you stop with the Sakurazuka stuff. I'm Naruto. Naruto-san then. Hiyashi felt a little weird having the terms of address dictated to him by a child, but as long as he maintained some pretense of formality, it didn't seem too bad to acquiesce. Especially given what he was going to ask of the boy shortly. Lead the way, then. Naruto stifled a yawn, and Hiyashi began to walk through the forest back towards Konoha. Between their conversation as they walked, Hiyashi mentally sounded out the request again and again, refining it until he knew that there was no way that the boy would possibly refuse. This was, after all, a rather vital matter. Hiyashi would not allow the boy to refuse. Notes. Sakurazukamori Genkaku Onmyo. Neihokaku Huhu roughly translates to Sakurazukamori illusion Onmyo. Root capture method.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.